Welcome back to Demystify Sci. I'm Anastasia,
I'm Shiloh.
and today we are talking about the food system. So, we have had a lot of conversations about economics, about shareholder value, about buybacks, about artificial prices in the stock market, and in the spirit of continuing our economic investigations, we wanted to figure out what exactly is happening to the food system, because it seems like everybody is paying more money for food that is of lower and lower quality. And so I ran across a guy named Austin Frerick, who it turns out has had kind of an extraordinary career. He's worked as a research assistant in Congress. He has worked as an economist for the US Treasury Department. He has run for Congress. And now he is a Yale Fellow who studies antitrust regulations. And he wrote this book called Barron's. And Barron's is all about the massive conglomerates that have gradually taken over the food system and have made things very expensive, very low quality, and have wrought kind of astounding damage on the landscape where they operate.
And their worker base, as it turns out.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's second, third, fourth order effects that go into these monopoly stories that aren't as simple as monopoly being unfair, although that's an important part of the story too.
Yeah, I think that it's really easy to look out onto the landscape and be like, monopoly bad. And then someone can argue, well, actually, it drives down the price of goods because you're able to vertically integrate things. And so Austin's collected in a lot of data on what monopolies actually do. And instead of writing a really dry book of tax legislation, rules, and things that have changed since the Reagan administration, he's told it through the story of these people and what business decisions that they've made in order to ensure their almost complete control over their specific markets. It's like coffee, grain, hogs, slaughterhouses, grocery stores. Did I say coffee? I think I already said coffee. I just love coffee so much I have to say it twice. Coffee. It's a really fascinating book. A link for that book is in the description. If you want to help support the podcast, you can buy the book. I would highly recommend it because it's so well researched. It came out in the conversation that he spent an insane amount of money on a fact checker because publishers don't fact check anymore, and he was worried about getting attacked by the barons if he said anything incorrect. And so it's just this deep resource of what has happened to us, to our country, and an optimistic story at the end of the day of what can be done about it.
So at this podcast, as you know, we are always looking at shifting paradigms, and I think we are all about to bear witness to an enormous paradigm shifts in the science of astrophysics and cosmology. Some things aren't right in the state of Denmark, in case you weren't aware. And there are all sorts of changes taking place, going back to the material basis of the sun, re-examining the significance of the CMB, and trying to put a new story on our universe. We have front row seats to that. Our Demysticon annual meeting this summer in Portugal is going to bring together some of the most powerful minds challenging the standard paradigm, along with some of the most staunch defenders of the standard paradigm. And we are going to have a weekend of discussions in the spirit of finding a new direction with respect to cosmological sciences, astrophysics, and astronomy. And it's going to be absolutely epic. So if you want to find out more about that, check out the link up here or come on over to demystifysci.com and learn more about how you can join us.
There's also links in the description. We're going to send out a notice about poster sessions pretty soon because we want to have people that come to the conference like we did for last time. We had a poster session, which was a lot of fun. And so we'll definitely do that again.
So if you attend, you can present a poster, and you should present a poster because everybody's got ideas.
It's going to be fantastic. Last conference was a really good weekend. I was depressed for 2 weeks after we'd pulled it off because it was just such a good time to hang out with everybody who came all the way out to Austin for the eclipse. This year we don't have the eclipse, but we do have the seaside in Sesimbra, Portugal. And so in between talks and lectures and panels, we'll be able to go down to the beach and have a really good time.
And remember, guys, we work directly for you. So the only reason we're able to do these conferences and put this podcast out is because we're supported by incredible patrons over at patreon.com/demystifysci. So if you want us to keep working for you, consider coming over and chipping in so that we can do more and more of these projects that y'all love.
if you don't have any cash right now, there's a bunch of stuff that you can do to nonetheless support the podcast. You can like, you can comment, you can subscribe, you can follow us on the podcast platforms, you can leave a comment, you can leave a review, and you can tell your friends about the amazing podcast that you have discovered, Demystify Sci. And if you've already done all of those, thank you very much. And for now, enjoy the conversation with Austin, and we'll see you next time.
The scientific revolution starts now.
The Demystify Sci podcast.
Let us see in the dark.
We've been feeling that really hard out here too, especially when it comes to getting mechanical services and stuff, like getting work done on our car. I'm always like worried that we're getting taken advantage, well, in various capacities, getting taken advantage of. And Nastia is kind of trying to figure it out. And she's like, well, I'm so friendly and I always try to understand what the different processes are. And I'm like, Nastia, I think they think you're smart and they think you make a lot of money. And because of that, no matter how friendly or so forth you are or how you dress.
My theory is this, where I'm like, I think that if you go into a service interaction and you have no idea of what the thing is that you're trying to get fixed, like you take your car to somebody and you're like, well, I don't know, it's just broken. Can you look at it? They're basically like, easy mark. But if you're like, hey, I've been looking, this is the thing that I've been hearing, these are the things that I've noticed, I don't know exactly how to fix this, can you help me out? I feel like my results tend to be better because I think that it is a class signal. Because I think that there's a bridge where the upper class just kind of, they have a guy. They're like, yeah, I got a guy who does that. I don't ever think about my car. I don't know how my car works. Why would I know how my car works? Like, I don't know how my septic tank works. Like, there's a guy who does that. And I'm sort of the opinion where I'm like, well, I think that that's the delineation of class lines in America. Where it's like, do you have somebody who does that thing for you, or are you the one who does it?
Then I'll add the other dynamic here is, especially among the younger elite, they move so much, they don't really establish those networks. And so much of that is just, I mean, most people don't move. You know, I mean, they live where they're born.
In America?
Yeah. I'm sorry, that could be a very Iowa thing.
That surprises me.
Well, most of your friends from high school are probably still right around there, aren't they?
That's true.
Most of my friends from high school, like, I think that's a really good point.
I guess when you're on the run, you're associated with people that are on the run too, and so you start thinking that's everybody.
Or it's like, I'm not really running from anything. I'm more like exploring. So like, I'm surrounded by people that are of this. In Russian, we call them the безродный космополит. So you're this like unanchored cosmopolitan, where you're just like free of.
That's a great phrase.
It like безродный is actually like more. It's more complex than just unanchored, because it's like you're a cosmopolitan without a motherland. Like Родина is motherland, and so безродный is like motherlandless.
I mean, that's kind of the phrase, maybe the critique of the elite of America right now is they're just so unanchored. They're beyond the nation state. Because these elite spaces all are kind of the same at some point. They don't understand how. I'm sorry.
They don't understand how. Hold on, finish your thought.
Well, I was just gonna the lack of identity, like this, how like national identity actually matters to a lot of people, and when you're unanchored like that, what is identity? I mean, what is national identity at that point?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that just the lot of being elite at something? I wonder. I mean, I don't know if that's the true or not. I hope it's not true, but when you're really at the top of any performance echelon, I feel like it's probably really hard to stay in touch with people, especially, and the axis of being known as well, coupled to that. It's very difficult for you to have ordinary interactions when you're known. I just wonder if it's inherently an isolating situation.
I would add, I mean, the beauty of America was, for the longest time, you had local elites. Like, we pushed down power. So, like, every state has their flagship university that produces an elite. And so you have different state elites battling. And that's kind of collapsed with consolidation. Like, there used to be an elite law firm in every state, and now it's just like all in New York City. So there's homogenization, nationalization of the elite culture too.
Oh, okay. And so what do you think that's doing? And when did you become aware that this was a thing that was happening?
Oh man, that's a good question. I felt a little bit. This sounds weird. I think we talked. I'm not sure if we talked about this last time. I love doing road trips.
We did, yeah.
Yeah, we did. Okay. Um, I'm in these elite circles a lot just because of Treasury and my work at Yale, and then just on going on road trips, and it's just there's a continual divergence in America where one side sees it and the other one doesn't. People in rural communities go to urban centers for the mall, whatever. Urban centers don't go to decaying rural communities. And I just like that's been really honed in on me, and I don't know. Like this is. I mean, I'm a failed politician. One little thing that really hit home to me is you used to have to kiss the rings of certain people in the Des Moines elite. Like there's just one guy, I kid you not. He used to own the paper in Des Moines Register. He owned the minor league ballpark in Des Moines. He just sold it to private equity. I kid you not. In order to get a check from him, you had to go to he owned a diner inside the ballpark. You'd go to the diner, he'd talk to you for an hour, tell you what you're doing wrong, he'd give you a check. But it was also a signal to that elite of the Iowa elite, this is a good candidate. That's all gone. Now a campaign in Iowa, you can essentially just raise money in New York and California. And I think realizing like I saw that dying out in my campaign because I did that. But here's the thing, that's a $500 check versus like what is $5,000 to someone on the coast is nothing, certain people. And I kind of saw those cultures of one dying and one the new norm. You kind of realize what we lost. And like I don't want to like romanticize political donations, but like there is something to be said, the loss of like local elite in like maintaining culture and because they tend to finance a lot of the nonprofits too, because they're vain, they want to look good in their community.
I mean, I think that there's something really powerful about having somebody who's sitting in town who you know who they are. And at the very least, you can put them on the apex of the pyramid of power where you're like, oh yeah, that's like Billy.
I think this is like an aspect of monopoly that we don't often consider is the lack of decentralization that results from it. Like, I think people look at monopolies and they're like, well, that's unfair because these people are basically taking all the business, which is kind of abstract compared to you're actually decentralizing the elite experiences at the same time by, I mean, private equity is a great example of that, but ways in which things just kind of get abstractly relocated away from their original source and really the constituency that's propping them up as chiefs, as elites.
In culture too. I mean, like you could do a whole episode on books. I mean, the problem with book industry is consolidated. The book elite are all basically in Brooklyn. And dear God, it's like trying to sell. Like I'm in this weirdest part. My book did really well in Middle America, but it didn't do well on the coast. Or like now, you know what I mean? Like relatively well, but like it's just really hard. Like the book critics now are all in like these elite centers, and like their cultural experiences or their lived experiences are just so much different in different places in America. And so you're just not seeing certain voices percolate, certain stories being told.
And nobody's really figured out how to bridge that, because I think everybody kind of recognizes that the concentration of power and influence, whether that's cultural or financial, is a problem. And okay, so the book is about the story of this consolidation. Would you say that it's a book about consolidation?
It's a book about, yes, but also like what neoliberalism did to the food system.
Can you unravel that a little bit more?
Yeah, so like I know neoliberal is like a catch-all phrase. I just view it as like laissez-faire.
Newt Gingrich in the background.
Yeah, I know. It's a laissez-faire. It's a deregulatory era. And this is what happens when you like, I think of regulation almost like a garden. If you don't prune or take care of a garden, some weed overruns it all. And that's kind of what's happened. And this is to me is articulating this is the food system. This is what happens. You take the guardrails away, power consolidates, and you have all these negative consequences from this consolidation of power.
And is it an unexpected consequence of deregulation, or is the idea that you would have one company that controls all of the coffee beans but selling them under these, it's like a monster with 1,000 faces. It's really weird, right? Because you go and you're like, ooh, there's Caribou and there's Pete's and there's Folgers and there's all of these other different brands, and then you lay out that like, well, actually there's a very, very small number of companies in the world that control basically any coffee bean that you're drinking. And it suddenly feels like creepy and weird because you've been fooled into thinking that there is a choice. In reality, it's all kind of going into the same maw. And so when deregulation starts to happen, do you think that it's the intended consequence for letting this kind of centralization occur, or it's just a total free?
Good for shareholders.
Yeah, no, I'm laughing because that's such a good catch on word choice there. No, this is what happens. Like it's this, like it sounds weird to say. I view this as natural. I actually view the moment we're in as cyclical. That's actually why I'm not as dark as other people. It's like this naturally happens. Capital naturally consolidates because like it's so stupid. I was sitting in on a business school class a few years ago and I realized the goal of any corporate executive is monopoly. That's where profits are. I mean, I feel like that's what an MBA is. How to be a monopolist. It was so funny. Like I love language and I was just in there being like, can we just say that these are monopoly strategies? Like this, and
it's also the goal of the State Department too, ultimately.
Yeah, it's dominance, it's power. It's like we don't use the word power. We're bringing it's coming back, but this whole notion of like a win-win is so naive to power. And
are there clear strategies that you can remember that you're like, hold on a second, this is basically just monopoly by any other name that you were hearing in this class?
Let me think. I'll have to think on that for a second. It's to me the bigger thing I realized in on those classes where we talk around things. I feel like so much language now, especially in elite culture, is you talk around. And I think because of my background, I'm a first generation college student, and like working class language is very simple and blunt, and elite language is not. And that's like kind of what I view my strength as a writer is like how do you take like so much language, like for example in the monopoly world there's a phrase called the consumer welfare standard where it's if I buy one company and I can show that prices go down for consumers, the purchase can go through. It's a made up phrase. It sounds smart. It's intellectually these words mean nothing, but it's playing to people's intellectual insecurity because they sound smart. But it allows for massive consolidation because you can hire any economist to produce those numbers. And you just quickly realize the BS of how hollowness that language is. But it's designed to keep you out so you don't understand what's going on.
Legal language is the same. It's funny that it's actually often in a dead language like Latin. Like I know was it the Akkadians when they conquered Babylon and so forth, they used Sumerian as this esoteric language amongst the elite for writing different codes in and so forth. There's something where it's like actually encoded. I feel like in physics it's mathematical language, if you want to call it a language, but the ability to just wield these abstract symbols in a way that sort of keeps people out who don't go through the gilding process to become part of that conversation. It's very intentionally maintained.
It is, and it's not kosher to call it out. Or like, that's the weird thing about corruption of this era is just we've professionalized and legitimized it so much where it's like it's so obviously what's going on. Like this is just old fashioned. Here's a check, but we're saving face.
So I guess like devil's advocate is, all right, obviously monopolies make it hard on the little guy, and that's unfair if you're into compassion and into fair games. But the one thing I was really struck by reading your book was just all of the downstream second, third, fourth order consequences of these monopolies developing, like literally down to people's own individual health and well-being, the health of the land. Just there's so many other parts that are dangerous about monopolies. And I was hoping we could talk about some of those.
Yeah, like beyond just the price of goods, right? Because you say that, so you have in this book a bunch of examples. So we have coffee, we have grocery stores, we have dairy farms, we have hog production, we have
berries
and like slaughterhouses. Is that it? Is there one more? Or is it 6?
There's 7, and I forget the 7th.
I think it's
grains?
Yes, grains. Thank you.
Grains. I have no recollection of that chapter. Okay. So we have all of these industries where some kind of deregulation happens. They gradually come to consolidate. And the standard story is capitalism bad, the haves and the have-nots on just the impact of the accumulation of wealth, right? Because the executives of all of these companies are massively wealthy. They're flying around in private jets. And the deeper story seems to be that because they're executives of like physical material industries that what they're doing is they're tearing people and land and territory up as they develop. And I think that this is what
And
Shiloh's
degrading the quality of the product ultimately too, and the land and everybody's common resources as well.
And that, I think that that's kind of an unexpected consequence, because you're like, okay, well, the accumulation of wealth, yeah, I can expect that. But when you talk to economists, they're like, well, economies of scale are really good because then you're more efficient and you can drive the marginal cost of your products down and the market. And you're kind of like, yeah, but then you have like,
At what costs?
manure swamps and all these. I was just struck by the fact that there's, for example, in the hogs chapter, there's these producers of hogs that are housing them in these industrial environments, these like massive barns where there's thousands of animals, and no community wants this in their backyard. Mm-hmm. But the power that has consolidated in this company is so strong that they're like, well, we can do whatever we want. We can pay for whatever we want to have happen, and you can't do anything about it.
I would step back for a second to your point on economists. They're kind of our gods of this era. We treat them like, but they're really just astrologers. I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. It's really easy and lazy to think you can view society as an Excel sheet. This stuff is very nuanced and complicated, and you can't put, like, how many hogs one person should own is not a math formula. These are moral questions we got to grapple with as a society, but we have tried to shove everything into these formulas. And I mean, we all know numbers like, I can make any number say what I want. And I say this as like, what started this whole thing? I was a tax economist at the US Treasury Department in a different lifetime. Like, that's what kind of got me going down this road for the book. And you see the lack of nuance, and like, especially in the scholarship, more qualitative research is not well regarded. And I think this is how we get to this moment, is like this cult of efficiency we lived under. Like, you can't put humanity into a formula, and it strips it away. And also what power does, like, to those communities, a lot of them fought the hog confinements, the industrialization of the hog industry, but they lost. And now they have Stockholm syndrome. They've given up. And so like, that is something where people just kind of, I think that's underappreciated, is like what power does to people, how it shapes how they respond to things too. But like, the economist point is, like, when you mentioned that, I just laughed because I think that's an undercurrent in my book, is we're treating these people like gods. And I think that's kind of how we got to this point.
Maybe we can just look at that hog example since you brought it up, and because you had this personal experience growing up with the lands that have been transformed. And could you just describe that to people who haven't had a chance to read the book yet?
Yeah, so like, I kind of view Iowa as a canary in the coal mine for America, for our food system. Like, Iowa should be the Tuscany in North America. It should be like the Napa Valley, like, for food tourism, but it's not. It's the second highest cancer rate now in America. One of the highest obesity rates in America, and also it has one of the worst has a water crisis. Like 60 to 70% of the waterways are now too polluted for people to go into. And it's because of this industrial food system. Keep in mind, most corn in Iowa is not grown for food. It's grown to burn in your cars. We're just wasting it. And you just see like this extractive model take over Iowa. And I kind of view Iowa, I truly do view Iowa now as an extraction colony, like a 19th century Appalachia coal mining state, or like an African, colony under the British rule. And the power dynamics resemble that. And we shouldn't be shocked that people are clinging to a strongman because of that. But that happened in my lifetime. Like, it's something simple as you would drive Iowa and you just saw animals. Like, my brother and I would play games with cows on the land or pigs, whatever. And like, it doesn't happen overnight, but slowly you drive, you smell the animals, but you don't see them. They're in these metal sheds all day. And even over the holidays, I was with my grandparents. We're going down to some grocery store they wanted to show me in southern Iowa. And we saw pigs on a farm. And we all got excited. And like, how sad is that? Because you do not see a pig on a farm in Iowa. You don't see pig outdoors in a farm anymore. You might see a dairy cow here and there in northeast Iowa, but they're largely gone. And it's kind of like to the point earlier about food quality. These corners are cut slowly. People, they didn't just go bankrupt all overnight. It's just this industrial model is cutting so many corners, has an unfair price advantage where the people doing it the traditional pasture way can't compete on price. And so the margin's tight, and then they eventually just throw in the towel. So like, you know what I mean? It's it took decades to get to this point.
Seems like it brings up an overarching theme here, which is this centralization. When you centralize something and move the decision space outside of the people that are immediately affected, then they don't have a chance to actually naturally regulate their own circumstances. So if you own a farm, you're probably not going to pollute your own creek that feeds into your water table that your well draws from, right? That's an easy, natural decision for someone to make in a decentralized format. But when you have this hyper centralization, those decisions are being made based on data that has nothing to do with your well on your property all of a sudden.
Yes, I realized this the other day is the disconnect between labor and capital in the farm system is driving a lot of that. Like most farmland now in Iowa is owned by non-Iowans. Grandma, grandpa die, kids put it in trust, they moved to Long Beach, they rent it out. If you rent land, you do not care if you're farming right up to the creek and destroying the topsoil. Because guess what? You're just trying to make that crop for the year. And like you're seeing this actually play out with bird flu in the dairy industry. Farmers used, like the actual owner of the cow used to milk their own cow. Now they don't. Now it's mostly undocumented men. And so they don't care about the health of like milking with the bird flu. And like that has really big ramifications, that separation between the two. I totally agree.
I mean, this stuff is really hard to talk about because I feel like it's almost impossible to find a handle on it, right? Like it's kind of like staring into the void a little bit and realizing the fact that most of us live in a society where the environments around us are not decided by the will of the people around us. We are served an environment that has been decided somewhere else. Like you drive through town here. We live in a rural community, 25,000 people maybe. And there's some local stores, but almost everything is a chain. Like the local stores here are tchotchke stores. You can buy crystals, you can buy clothes, you can buy antique furniture. But everything else is a big box store. And it's really weird because you can see the way that the town is organized around them. And you can see how they make these land use decisions about the town. And there's not a ton of farming here. There's not a ton of timber here because it used to be logging country, and then it used to be weed country. And so now it's this nothing country where, as far as I can tell, the biggest employer is the state here. It's like healthcare in the state. And so
all those retired weed farmers.
Yeah, there's a lot of retired weed farmers. And so I feel like when you're looking out at this from a place like Southern Oregon, you look onto a landscape where things are just going to continuously keep happening to you. And you will never really have the ability to say, well, I want to open a grocery store. I want to compete. Wait, you're going to compete with Walmart? You're going to compete with Fred Meyer that can sell you everything from like diamond necklaces to kayaks to organic produce? Like it feels like we're just having to wait the clock out of allowing all of these things to collapse. Do you have that feeling, or do you have more hope than that?
Yeah, I mean, flip a coin. I mean, some days, that's why first of all, I love that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, a few years ago, because we all grapple with nihilism now, but in the day, just be a good person. On the flip side, to the point earlier about, I kind of view this all as natural, this can't hold. It's some Teddy Roosevelt type person is going to come along and, lack of better words, smash the monopolists. Like the politics are too good. Concentrated industries gouge. My favorite slide, I open my presentations now with this slide, is what Americans spend on food compared to other countries. Because I realize in the back of people's minds is I'm asking you to pay more for food. When you pull the data from USDA, and this is based on 2021 data before this whole greed inflation thing took hold, Americans actually spend more money on food than like per person than Germany, United Kingdom, Canada. We're about dollar for dollar for Italy. And like what a dollar gets you in Italy is very different than a dollar here. And so we're just paying more for garbage. The concentrated markets gouge, they go too far. Like greed and monopoly go too far and they eventually break. That's the hope I have here is these Gilded Ages always crash and burn. The question is what's next? Intellectually, I wanted to write this book because I want to understand how power is amassed. it's very, very rarely like the best and brightest naturally make the best product. Therefore, you know what I mean? Usually it's just a story of regulatory capture, usually, and corners being cut. But you have to understand how those corners are being cut in order to then, when you have a cleansing moment to like a reform era, how do you fix it? Or like what should a well-regulated meat market look like? You know, I mean, that's what I want to focus in on, but that's kind of what drives me is at some point this system cannot hold.
I'm a little bit suspicious of that. I want to believe that. Like, first and foremost, like, I deeply want to believe that the system cannot hold, because I think that that's far more optimistic than what I'm looking at, which is, for example, so you have somebody like Trump who campaigns on MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, all of these really good sounding ideas where it's like, yeah, we shouldn't be eating garbage. That's a really good idea. And then they get into office, and then like a week within that, there's some sort of announcement where I think that their proposed director for the USDA says that they're going to force states to sell crated pigs. So basically the controversy here is the fact that states like California have said you cannot sell meat that comes from animals that have been confined to a crate for their entire life. Like, you have to, the idea that you could raise pigs confined to a crate for their entire lives is horrific to begin with. But some states have said, okay, that's too inhumane. You can't, if you do that, you can't sell that meat here. And the administration is saying that they're going to overturn those bans and force states to sell that kind of meat. Where I'm like, that makes me much less optimistic for there being any kind of change possible, because if you're campaigning on the back of we're going to fix the food system and this is one of your first things, it's like, well, dang.
Let me just step back into and say there's a little bit of naiveness I have here, because like the question I always got, there's two questions I always got in the book tour. Why did you write this? And also, are you afraid of your safety? And I legit writing, like I've never, and it's always like a nice old lady too that asks me about my safety. That is the beauty of America, is I can write a book like this and I don't have to worry about thugs. You know, I mean, there's things I can worry about, lawsuits and all that, but I don't have to worry about my harm. And like, part of my naiveness also comes from like, I'm the son of a truck driver. Like, my parents didn't go to college, and now look at the life I've been able to live and travel and see. And like, that is the beauty of America. But also, like, America has a very have notness, and like I've seen the dark side of it. So I'm living the American dream. Like, that's what I tell my grandpa all the time. I think there's a lack of gratefulness in this country right now. Like, that's my personal hot take when I leave this country, is like, nowhere else in the world does a Costco exist. Like, what Costco does is kind of insane and kind of incredible from like a distributional standpoint, an executional standpoint. But
and the employees seem pretty happy too.
Yeah, and like there's something like, I think one of the best things about America is actually weirdly a grocery store. Like, all these different cultures hitting each other, the fusions of them, the combining, the fact you can get these different cuisines, like, it's kind of incredible. It's hyper innovation. There's beauty here. I don't want to be naive, but you're right. I mean, you can look at that one example and see darkness, but on the flip side, I look at Lena Khan. She was President Biden's appointment to the Federal Trade Commission. This young woman who literally got that appointment because she wrote an academic article that went viral, how Amazon's monopoly should be broken up. She got that political appointment. She stopped the Kroger-Albertson merger. She's the one that got filed all these antitrust lawsuits against big tech that both sides of the aisle kind of adored. You had Matt Gaetz praising her. And I would argue she's probably President Biden's best political appointee. So like, the politics are really good here, but this doesn't happen overnight. Like, even we talk about Teddy Roosevelt and the meat monopolies. That was decades of the making. Like, we tend to truncate history. I just think we're at the start of an era. Like, yes, you're going to see, what we saw with the MAHA movement is this hits. People know this system. Like, that's the weirdest thing too with this, from my book, that's been for me, is I went on Bloomberg. I went on Bloomberg's spot. Like, Bloomberg is the most pro-capital business publication out there. And they get it because these are yuppies that go to Europe and see how much better the food system is. Like, I intentionally, I didn't want to be pigeonholed in this book. And I really do think weird things happen in American history when weird movements come together. And then the MAHA movement showed that. And like, you're seeing other things have shown it. Execution is going to be a big question, but someone eventually will. I mean, that's also my naiveness, given my background playing into it. But I don't know. I just keep like I realize no one's really articulating hope. Personally, I overemphasize the conclusion of my book because people really want that hope. Like, what should a post neoliberalism food system be? Because that's what people crave. I think everyone, the unsaid thing is move to the city, move to your kid or robots or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, no one's being like, in the day, we're just talking food. We're just talking hogs. This is not AI. This is not, we know what to do here. We dealt with meat monopolies literally a century ago.
I mean, I think that's interesting. That's an interesting perspective, which is that, okay, it's cyclical. We've been here before.
I really want to go through your solution set specifically with respect to the reform measures that you mentioned in the book. I feel like it's not often that people come on here and actually have solutions for the future. So that would be actually really interesting.
That's one of the nice, like, that's like the best compliment because like that's one of my biggest pet peeves with nonfiction books. Like, I love the book Evicted on housing policy in America, but the solutions were just like not, don't tell me how awful something is and leave me like more depressed at the end. Also, like, you marinate in that material forever. Like, don't you have like, what do you think? And part of, I should also say, I love doing speaking engagements. I call it the rubber chicken circuit, like the kind of roadside interstate hotels, because you kind of throw ideas out there, solutions. You hear how they're taken. People come up to you with ideas. They tell you what they're doing locally. My favorite one is put animals back on the land. I think most grain production will be robotics moving forward, but like ethanol is going to die. And so what are we going to do with half the corn crop? And to me, it's take animals out of the metal sheds and put them on land because there's only so many cows on pasture one person can look after. And like animal agriculture is like very labor intensive, and especially with dairy. Dairy is a very intimate relationship with the animal. They like you talk to any dairy farmer, every cow is like a dog to them. They'll tell you the lineage, they'll tell you the personality. There's a sense of duty and responsibility in that work that I think is underappreciated, and also just makes a better product. Like, inputs really matter in meat and dairy, and like a cow eating grass is going to make a much better tasting breast milk than a cow in a metal shed in the New Mexico desert.
Yeah, and again, decentralization, right? If you're not going to put your own pet cow in a crate, or I guess it was hogs. You're not going to put your own hog that you're saving up for Christmas dinner or whatever in a crate. Like, no one, maybe like some psychopath somewhere would do it, but for the most part, people are going to respond to the needs of the animal who are raising them. It's just when those decisions are being made from so far away in an office somewhere based on shareholder preferences that you end up with these really bizarre, almost psychopathic decisions about how these beings are treated.
Do you think? Add on one. Oh, sorry. Just one like little. This is like the coolest thing I've heard recently, and this is what like to the one of those speaking things. I was talking at a Wisconsin water park hotel last month, and one of my favorite dairy farmers was Sarah Lloyd was telling me the story of how there was this pilot program going on in Wisconsin, Minnesota that's just she loves, and it's like becoming popular, where historically on Native American lands we've just given them surplus agricultural products. Like, it's really bad, exploitive. Here's a bunch of crappy cheese. Here's a big block of it. What this program did was, for food assistance, instead of just giving them leftover government surplus, is they bought from tribal farmers and gave them a box of tribal food. So it'd be like bison, wild rice, all that kind of stuff. So you're maintaining heritage, you're keeping your money local, all that kind of good stuff. And first of all, that's a feel good. I think people really want feel good things right now. Like, that's such a good feel good correction of a historical wrong. But also, like, that's the beauty of America is these things. DC is usually the last one to know. It always starts locally. Like, the New Deal didn't happen overnight. A lot of New Deal came from Wisconsin. Unemployment insurance, all that kind of stuff, because of that weird German heritage in Wisconsin. And so like that, I mean, no one knows about this program because there's no news story on it yet. It's just people, bureaucrats, local people in Wisconsin innovating. Because
wait, can you tie the Germans back? I'm sorry, I probably missed the reference. I should have already understood.
You'd probably appreciate this. Wisconsin has this really unique German heritage, and in Milwaukee, and especially University of Wisconsin, where a lot, dear God, you probably know this so much more than me. A lot of the welfare state and democracies originated in Germany, I believe. Do you know this history?
I should. I feel like I should. I'm deeply embarrassed not to. I mean, are we talking about, are we going back to like early Marxism and stuff like that? Like the real roots of the modern political discord?
I think so. Like in my head, 1880s comes up. Something about like the social welfare state comes out of Germany. My understanding. This is like grad school readings I've done years ago. Unemployment insurance is the one I'm thinking of in particular. And then academics in Wisconsin saw it, applied it at the state level, and eventually went national.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Okay.
But the larger point here is that we read the federal program of something like the New Deal as being something that was hatched in Washington.
Yes.
But what you're saying is that, well, actually, it's the process of grassroots programs that deal with something in their local community in some specific way, which works, which then gets nationalized over time.
100%. Like even from monopoly to the Teddy Roosevelt thing, the first anti-monopoly laws in the world started with Iowa farmers. They were pissed at grain elevators. They passed the first antitrust laws in the world in Iowa. Then a few states did it. Then the federal government did it. And then it took 3 presidents for one to finally do something. But we truncate that history. But it's like, I say that because people need to remember that right now. Like, focus on what you can do locally because you need proof of concepts. Like, look at marijuana. I mean, I think marijuana is a great example.
And just in the sense that it was something that was basically like Berkeley at some point decided that they weren't going to listen to federal laws, and now most states have legalized it to some capacity. People
saw states legalize and they didn't go to hell in a handbasket, and then Republican politicians were, or like both sides of the aisle were like, "Well, this is easy tax revenue. Why not?"
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that that's definitely optimistic. I wonder, there's like a bunch of things that immediately start to wonder about. Number one is like being a politician in America. So the way that I can imagine this working is that you have people that are in politics that are actually responding to the desires of their constituents rather than desires of the conglomerates that operate in their sectors, and so gradually are able to implement the kinds of programs that their constituents want. Is it possible for somebody to get elected without having some massive conglomerate fund them? Because everything that I've heard about elections in the United States...
Or a bank.
What's that?
Or a bank.
Do banks fund elections?
They donate.
Candidates.
What? I had no
Of course,
idea.
yeah.
That seems like you shouldn't be allowed to do that. But
not just banks, but groups, that corporate groups.
Sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so it's like...
Which is decentralized interests, once again.
Decentralized financial interests, right? So if you have that every single candidate is going to get propped up by somebody whose bottom line is, we need to make sure that this district is friendly to business. What's the path towards getting this sort of grassroots movement started at scale, even locally, if every single politician is going to be allowing the like hog sheds to move in?
I mean, I don't want to be like, I want people to know, or you guys to know, trust me, I can be just as cynical. I think things can go really dark directions right now in America, based on like authoritarianism, all these type of directions. This is me deciding to like choose the more positive path, but you're right, politics, AOC is the easy example that comes to mind of like, you're going to get outliers in like politics in the days of media game. Either you take money from banks to buy media or you earn media through putting on a show. Harris had more money, but Trump put on a better show. Teddy Roosevelt understood politics as theater. You're just going to, I don't know. I don't want to be naive, but like most politicians will be bought. Campaigns are expensive, but at some point, the greed. I mean, I really do think we're just living. I joked to my husband we're living in cabaret right now. I think the stock market is artificially overvalued. I think there's a lot of bubbles in the economy, and at some point there'll be a correction. And I think people really want a fighter right now. I just get the sense they want someone who speaks with conviction, and it's gonna. I don't know. I feel like people know in the day. They don't remember what you said, but they remember how they felt. And people know when someone's speaking with conviction when they're not. That's like my personal belief. And I think a lot of politicians, because honestly, and I'm speaking this from example, like it's really scary to run for politics now in America because of the dark money. You say one wrong thing and you can have $5 million coming against you.
Did you have this
makes them really-
experience when you were running for office?
Say again?
Did you have this experience when you were running for office?
Yeah. I was always afraid because of what I said about agriculture, they would come after me. I mean, my whole logic for running was no one's going to get you a seat at the table. You have to fight for it. And like Democrats, in my personal opinion, in Iowa, are really risk adverse. They wouldn't touch ethanol. They wouldn't touch yada, 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 or confinements, industrial animal confinements. So I ran for state senate. I lost by 143 votes. But it was always in the back of my mind. But I decided to lean into, I actually wanted to put on a show. I actually kind of wanted to fight, to be frank with you. Because it's like, you kind of lose if no one's paying attention. At least the hard part is like the consolidation of the media makes it like hard to get attention. So you really kind of have to like think outside the box and like, I mean, I took a lot of lessons from that to this book, actually. I mean, most people who write a book will tell you now publishers don't do anything for you. And so like knowing that going into it, I treated this book like a political campaign. Like, how do I troll a baron? Like my hog baron attacked me when I rolled the book out, which was like, you know, I'm smiling because, you know, I want to show at the same time too. Fun fact for people, like the liability now is on authors. So when you write a book, I can get sued up to wazoo. And like, for example, like authors now have to pay for their own fact checking, which is incredibly scary. I mean, I didn't know that when I signed the contract. So we had to spend $15,000 of our own money to fact check every single little thing in this book. That's why I have 1,000 footnotes, and that is there to protect me.
That's
because it's like
wild.
It's so wild, and like that's something I've been trying to be more public about because
I noticed that I was like every single sentence almost is referenced. I was like, this is insane. I didn't understand why, because I was like in a different book. I can imagine there being like a couple of a similar book written 30 years ago wouldn't have been that well referenced, and I had no idea that it was like a cover your ass thing.
Cover my ass, but like I will say two things. There is this weird thing, like the one fight, Eric Schlosser's kind of my mentor in this. He wrote my foreword, he wrote Fast Food Nation. He did not write he didn't want me to have numbers in the text. It's like weird thing right now in nonfiction where a lot of people, you have to flip to the back and they'll show the word and they'll have the citation, the sentence. They don't put the numbers in the text because a lot of writer types think that interrupts the flow. I wanted the numbers in the text and I fought to keep them in because I feel like in this day and age, people want to know you have the receipts, especially if you're making these like large acquisitions. Like some of these things sound so ridiculous. It's hard to believe when you see that number, you might not flip to it, but you know, there's like a peace of mind that there is a piece of evidence there. And the other thing too, is just, I had a really good fact checker. I mean, I realized writing a book it's a team sport. And I had this phenomenal person I worked with who like we spent each chapter was like a week or two of just me and her go back and forth of like the littlest thing. And like I cannot recommend that enough. And like I kind of think of good book writing as almost like a crock pot. I took 5 years to write this. And it's like, I mean, like the tones of chapters changed over time. Like my first version of the hog chapter, I was angry because I was just pissed hearing what happened to Iowa. But then like the more I kind of marinated in it, to me, it reads more as sad because it just all fell apart. And so, but that to me is like crock pot, where you just kind of write and then you don't touch something for a few months, come back to it. But I mean, that's just not the day and age we live in right now.
I think you're in a particularly financially dangerous corner of nonfiction too, because you're writing about people and entities that are very powerful and their interests are not aligned with your book. And, you know, if you're writing about dead people from a long time ago, or if you're writing about, you know, some scientific process, it's probably a lot safer. That seems to be a particular hazard of doing this kind of investigative journalism.
It is, yes and no. It scares. I feel better by using primary sources. Someone died. Like I should let me. The one really good example of this is my hog baron, my dairy baron. I revealed that someone died inside one of his dairy facilities, and this is one of the largest tourist attractions in the state of Indiana. And it wasn't like you know what I mean? I wasn't like knocking on doors. I wasn't like running around with like a magnifying glass. This was public records, but our media system is so broken, no one discovered it. And it's just to keep the story simple, most of these things are complex spider webs, like the way they set these structures up. So the name of the dairy facility is a different name than the public name. And by researching, mapping out these diagrams, I realized, oh, this is what's going on here. And that's how I was able to essentially put light on something that was public already, but no one had realized it. And I actually think that says a lot about this current media moment. Is just so many of these stories are not being told, and they're right there in the open.
Can you just tell people really quick what the story is of the guy who died?
Yeah, I mean, it's so dairy is very labor intensive because these cows have to be milked multiple times a day. This dairy operation, there's about 35,000 cows there, and about an hour south of Gary, Indiana. And my whole dairy baron, the whole kind of thesis of that, or the narrative of that chapter, is he's ahead of the narrative, trying to get ahead of the storm. And one big thing is where, let me take you inside a dairy facility so you can tour it. You literally can board a bus. I've been on this bus. You go down it. He tells you how happy the cows are for being inside all day. And part of the things is when you put cows indoors, they create additional methane gas when their manure breaks down than when they're on grass. That's a huge thing I realized that's been just a step back. When a cow defecates on land, she's fertilizing her feed. When you put her indoors, you need fossil fuels to grow her feed, but then she also creates additional methane gas from the way that manure breaks down. So it's actually more destructive for the environment. Dairy farmers do not have this problem. My dairy baron realized this is one of his biggest Achilles heels. So to get ahead of the narrative, he basically took money from this government program that's coming from family dairy farmers and used that money against them to essentially solve a problem of his own creation, and then take a negative and make it a positive and saying, oh, this is a good climate thing. I mean, a lot of President Biden, Secretary of Agriculture, was a former industrial dairy lobbyist who tried to hold this up as a solution to the climate crisis, including ethanol in airplanes, like just dumb things like that, because he's a lobbyist, or was. So I kind of tell this story. I mean, this is a convoluted way of saying it, but this worker got sucked into this manure digester that processes the manure. The manure digester replicates what goes on in the belly to capture the gas that comes off. And you read the report, and it reads like a Final Fantasy thing. And this is quote a climate solution. And also keep in mind, dairy, you should just to step back like from the very get-go. You probably should not do dairy here. This is a former wetlands. Like this is known as Everglades of the North. Like Michigan used to overflow here. Teddy Roosevelt used to go hunting here. This shouldn't even be in row crops, let alone dairy cows. Dairy cows defecate 60, 80 pounds a day. Like the dairy cows in this operation do as much manure in a day as the city of Austin, Texas. I mean, that's when you say it this way, I feel like so much of the food system, it's just so stupid. It's so illogical. It doesn't make sense when you step back like it, but you saw how we got to this point.
But I mean, go ahead.
Good for the shareholders. Yeah. Wait, by the way, I want to get back to the solution set too. I can't let that go.
Yeah. I mean, I think that do you think that there's a way to return these lands to being beautiful again? Like, what is the best way for that? I guess
so we had animals back on the land as number one. And
I think that can sound kind of contradictory, because on one level we're saying that the animals produce all of this waste, but like you said, when you have smallholder farms as opposed to these giant conglomerates, the impact of the waste is radically different. Like if you have somebody who has a herd of 100 cows and there's just a bunch of herds of hundreds of cows, then that's not a big deal the way that it is when there's a barn that has 35,000 animals in it that are basically making these enormous anoxic manure lagoons that then have to go through the sci-fi processing.
Like related to that, is it feasible? Like, would people actually be able to afford milk and butter and so forth if it was done that way? I suppose is the kind of devil's advocate position with respect to.
I've always wondered about subsidies, right? Because like these large corporations have enormous amounts of government subsidies that allow them to sell
soy and corn.
Well, no, even like milk and dairy, right? Like the big dairy farms are heavily subsidized. Is that accurate?
Yeah, their feed is. And milk is like there's a joke. So every commodity is different. That was kind of the challenge and fun thing of writing this book, is learning not only the different regional production models in America, but also like the different commodities. And the whole dairy system is predicated on pre-refrigeration, which makes no sense because it's like milk would expire fast, so it had a high subsidy versus like cheese has a long shelf life. But the subsidy system in America, that's my grain baron chapter, Cargill, because I want to explain to people the Farm Bill. It's rooted in, it comes out in the New Deal, but to me, it was really rooted in Goldilocks thinking. Agriculture productions, how do you find a sweet spot? How do you produce enough so the farmer makes a decent living, but not overproduces? Because what happened, what we saw in the Dust Bowl, where during World War One, America asked its farmers ramp up production because these fields are taken out of production in Europe. War's over; those fields come back online. We're producing too much. Markets are glutted, but when prices are low, the incentive is to produce more. So you engage in destructive environmental practices, destroy your land, making it becomes a death spiral. So this New Deal thing comes along, goes, we'll give you subsidies, but you have to take land out of production. Like they were tied together. So you have to take 10% of land out of production. It's figuring, but you can only get so much. It's trying to figure out an ecological balance. Fast forward, I really focus on the 1996 Farm Bill, which I call the Wall Street Farm Bill, and that is about overproduction of a few key things. My grain baron hated it. Cargill is the largest private company in America. No one knows about it. They want to move and process as much grain as possible. So if you grow corn, you get a ton of subsidies. If you grow carrots, you get nothing. So first of all, the Farm Bill picks favorites. So right now, that's why to me it takes money to eat healthy in this country, because we subsidize crap. We subsidize junk food, not good food. At the same time, too, it's weird. I think of a family farm as almost like a retirement portfolio, where you grow your own grains, feed your own animals. Now you fast forward and you have 5 or 6 crops. So in case one craters, you have other ones. Now the system pushes people to do 1 or 2 things, and it makes you very fragile. There's that really good book on the Ukraine farm crisis called The Red Scare. Red, I think it's called. Where when the Soviet Union took over Ukraine, they really pushed Ukraine farmers to do one thing, and it made them really fragile. So then you had a massive famine that hit. You kind of see a similar system play out now in America, where farmers, there's some farmers who grow grain. You sell it to Cargill, who then sells it to the industrial animal facility. So you're kind of separating that, and you're making those systems very, very fragile. And never forget that everything you eat is subsidized. The question is what degree. We have chosen to make this system this way because Walmart doesn't want to move fresh produce. It doesn't want a different berry producer for each store. It wants to have one company that can do Oreos for all 4,000 stores. And so that's something to keep in mind here. Is this is why we got to this system, but it doesn't have to be this system. This is actually a very weird, radical system.
Yeah. So what's the specific vision for how to walk that back in terms of getting food that's good for you and good for your local land to be the cheap subsidized food versus the expensive garbage? How does that inverted? How does that happen?
I would say the government needs to stop picking favorites. I would stop. Crop insurance, just to get really in the weeds. So the way crop insurance works now is 60% of your premium is paid for by taxpayers. When people hear that term, they think it's for rain, storms. It's not. It's insurance for low prices, but it only applies to a few crops. And there's no cap to it either. So unbeknownst to most people, Bill Gates owns the most farmland in America. So he can get as much low wage insurance to grow corn as he wants. So first of all, you're just pushing everyone to do corn. I think that program is too broken. I'd rather take the current Farm Bill programs, conservation, crop insurance, and commodity, and just make one big program of sustainability, or stewardship payments, I would call them. But stop picking favorites and say, these are farm practices. If you do cover crops, if you buffer strips, more of you engage in certain good environmental practices, you get subsidies. But I think we should stop subsidizing certain crops. I think that's how you get away from that. Because right now, we are making this industrial animal model artificially cheap. And also, just keep in mind with these animal things, no city with if you regulate hog manure like human manure, that model is no longer economically viable. There are just so many of these things that once you make them play at a level playing field, they're not viable.
Who's in the position to make those reforms? What's the actual nuts and bolts process by which these laws would change?
That's the Farm Bill, and that's Congress. That's every 5 years. And what's interesting for me is that's collapsing right in front of us. You have part of the Maha movement. They can't pass. Republicans, even the Republican parties in the House caucus is an internal revolt over, because it's the kind of libertarian apparatus thinks it's so gluttonous, especially crop insurance, You have a lot of the more Maha types just saying like, this is so unhealthy. And like the dirty secret is like these hog barons, they hollowed out their voter base. You know, what it used to be tons of farm families now is just one guy who lives in Naples, Florida, and pays a bunch of people low wage work. They don't care what the farm bill does. So it's really up to Congress to do something here. And I should say, I mean, other countries have done this. New Zealand did something like this a few decades ago, where basically eliminated picking certain crops and just engages in conservation practices.
Where does their direct mode of power come from to push Congress to do something like that? Is that somebody has to actually run for Congress on the back of making this their contribution? Like, how does that happen in Congress that they decide? Is you feel like I've heard you intimate that you think it's become bloated to the point of breaking, and how does that actual fracture happen? Like, what motivates an individual to introduce that bill?
I kind of have this might be theory of American government right now where it's like Congress just hasn't used power since 2010.
Just because they can't agree on anything?
That and like it just doesn't function. I mean, there's a whole weird history in politics of like power in Congress can be concentrated in the leadership and then it gets deconcentrated to the committee structure. And what's happened with campaign finance deregulation is speakers, the leaders of the parties are super powerful because they control these outside money sources. And so like Newt Gingrich famously in 1994 stripped a lot of committees of their power and their staff. So these staff didn't have the expertise in these, negotiations. So you see these 20-year-olds who don't really know anything cycle in and out being exploited by the lobbyist. I used to be a Congressional Research Service staffer, which is like a Library of Congress. So like that's the kind of the world I come from. And that's kind of what they were telling me. We want members of Congress to be powerful and to dictate things, like to actually use their power. Like, I think pork barrel spending is actually an okay thing. If you're a member of Congress for 30 years, you should be able to bring home a bridge. Because you know what? Someone's going to make that decision one day. Is it going to be a bureaucrat in DC? Or is it going to be a member of Congress utilizing their power? But what's happened, even like on a budget perspective, there used to be all these different budget bills, how you finance agencies in Congress. Such system has collapsed, and they essentially do these mega omnibus bills that finance everything. But that just makes the speaker powerful, not the committee person. So like,
I don't know enough about how government works in order to be able to understand why that's the case.
Can you go back and tell us about the campaign finance? What did you call it? Deregulation.
So there's a couple things on the table. So basically you're saying that since 2010, Congress hasn't used its power and you're tying it to the deregulation of campaign finance reform. So you're pointing to like Citizens United and pushing Congress into an era of not using its power. And so help us understand how the structure of Congress and deregulation and committees and like speakers leads to this sort of thing.
So let's just take a race, for example. Iowa, I just looked this up the other day. The Iowa Senate race, Joni Ernst's re-election campaign, 2020, I believe, was a $270 million race. Most of that money was not from the campaigns themselves. It's outside money. A lot of it is like Mitch McConnell and like Chuck Schumer. They have their own super PACs where like, for example, laws right now say you can only give, let's say $10,000 to a Senate campaign. Because of the Supreme Court, that certain Citizens United case and others, and certain political appointees have essentially meant you can give as much money. I can personally write a $10 million check Chuck Schumer's super PAC. That $10 million, Chuck Schumer is going to, trust me, is going to know much more about that $10 million. That person who gave that check can have so much more power over that $5,000 check.
I have a question. Can you give $10 million directly to Chuck Schumer, or can you only give it to his PAC?
To a super PAC. But like, okay, there's all this goes back to language. We pretend like they don't control things. We all know they do.
And like a super PAC, because we do have people that don't live in the United States. Super PAC is this like really, really large political action committee, which is this allegedly independent organization that collects money to enact lobbying campaigns.
So like in theory, they're somewhat independent and they're issue based, yada yada. Like they can't. I'm not a legal lawyer here, so I want to be careful. The way they generally tend to operate are, I really do not believe they're independent. I believe exactly these people know what's going on. There's coordination going on. The staffing tends to be the similar thing. And they tend to like line up with the campaigns. It's a way to essentially get around that like limit on how much you can give a campaign.
Okay, and so other question. You said Chuck Schumer's super PAC. does everybody in Congress have a super PAC that they're associated with?
They might have, I'm not sure if everyone, a lot of them have maybe an outside PAC, but the leadership ones are the ones that matter with the by far the most money. And because of the way we used to have like a agriculture funding bill, a transportation funding bill. When that collapsed and we do these mega funding bills that you kind of see every year in America, these they have the weirdest names, omnibus, cromnibus, whatever. That means like who decides to go in that bill is no longer the committee person who shepherds that bill through. It's now the speaker and his staff who's haggling behind closed doors, the opposition party or whatever. So that makes the speaker super PAC really powerful because he could decide what goes in and what goes out.
How does the speaker get the money from the super PAC, or how are they tied to the actual person themselves?
Yeah, so you send $10 million to Schumer's super PAC, and you're like, he's definitely
this independent.
Yeah.
There's a PAC that's independent, but somehow tends to act in Schumer's interests. Like there's this whole dance we all have to do where we pretend that they're independent.
So when you say that they act in his interests, specifically, what are the actions that they're taking where the actions that they take entail them spending money that somehow directly benefits Schumer? Like what's the machination there? Or you could, if you don't want to talk specifically about Schumer, we could just call like arbitrary Congressman Y.
Yeah,
and their super
our
PAC.
arbitrary speaker Y. So like, let's just use the Iowa example. It's easier for me. In that race, that money means a lot. That outside, somewhat independent Schumer money means a lot in that race. Who's going to win? And so, for example, in that race, you had a retired military man running a Democratic primary, and then you had a strip mall developer. The Schumer favorite was the strip mall developer. He comes in, brings a ton of money. That candidate, if they win, will feel then indebted to that person because they also know I got reelection 6 years. I need to keep him happy, so he'll dump a ton of money into my reelection race. And so the incentives are to first of all, vote to reelect Schumer as speaker or the caucus leader, and it makes you indebted to that person because you're no longer financing your own because there's no real money left in Iowa. It's New York money fighting New York money routed through Washington, D.C. You can't raise that kind of money in Iowa anymore like you used to from the lawyer elite of Des Moines.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this. So you basically, the super PAC is an independent organization that collects donations for some publicly announced set of causes that are also causes that, let's say, this senator is pro. This like powerful senator aligns with these causes. The super PAC aligns with these causes. And the money that the super PAC collects does not go directly to the powerful senator. That money is then spent in order to build up a coalition of other representatives, which are then kind of in this unspoken way obligated to support the powerful senator whose disembodied war chest was responsible for their election.
Makes that guy, it's easier for him to achieve his goals stated to his constituency with the support of the PAC, it sounds like.
Well, no, it sounds like the PAC is actually going out and supporting candidates. And then at the other end of that carrot is the stick that says, well, we supported you, so now you have to do what Schumer says.
So the PAC can give lots of money to Schumer directly to his campaign?
No. So, okay, there's two Congress people in this model. There is the sitting congressperson, so let's say a speaker or a coalition leader, who has a really big PAC. The PAC can collect money, but that money never flows directly to the politician. What happens is that money is spent in races around the country to ensure that politicians who this powerful sitting congressperson supports will win, so that the deck of Congress is stacked to ensure that the person whose super PAC is funding these races remains in power.
Yes. And it's a weird thing where optically, the average American, you just see all these TV ads saying, Congressman good, Congressman bad. You don't really realize who's paying for it at the bottom because they all kind of sound the same. People inside the game know.
So the PACs do
kinda-
pay for other people's
They're
campaigns.
literally, because this is what Austin was saying. He was like, you can't raise $270 million in Iowa. There's not enough people in Iowa to get you that kind of money. And so the campaign, how much did the campaign in Iowa actually raise locally? Do you know?
Pulling them around the Democrat, maybe $30 to $50 million, and the same on the Republican side.
So that's
look at Elon Musk. I mean, Elon Musk gave the president. He didn't give him like it was like $250 billion.
oh my God.
Like that is. I don't know. That's kind of where we are right now, though. I mean, it's very scary. I don't know how to say it. I mean, I don't know. Like to your point earlier, like to Shiloh's point earlier, like if not now, then when? You know what I mean? Like, why not write a book like this? I mean, I don't have a kid, so sue me. What, you get my DVD collection? I don't have assets. You know what I mean? Like, this moment in America demands, people want. I think the reason why Lena Khan hits so hard with people is she's like that statue of the young girl standing up to the Wall Street Bull. People want those narratives right now. And like, whatever you think is going to happen, how dark you think the world is going to be, you got to live with yourself. And you're like, well, at least I tried. I will always have peace of mind that I ran for office. You know what I mean? I did that. I tried that dream. It didn't work out, but I have that peace of mind. You do not want to live a life of like, well, I'm resigned, whatever, let them roll. Like, I'll roll over. Because the second you do that, people lose. And I intentionally opened my book. You know what? I didn't do it intentionally. I kind of realized it after the fact. I profiled Julie Dunn. She's a retired secretary in Iowa who fights my hog baron. And she's like, and what gives me hope here is it's most of the people fighting industrial animals are pissed off old ladies in rural communities. They don't like what's happened. They remember what it used to be, and they don't want their grandkids to be like this. And Julie always told me, I'm doing this for my granddaughter because I don't want her to live like this. And it's most people are like her. It's really just a few greedy people holding us back. Most people see the system makes bad tasting food. They want a better system. I just, in my heart of hearts, think I just think the politics are so good of like even like going to meatpacking. It's so machismo to attack meatpacking. It's such good politics. Like they're employing kids, they're gouging you at the store, and they're also like not American-owned companies. Be really frank. Most of the hogs now are owned by a Chinese multinational with ties to the government there. A lot of the beef is Brazilian. The politics here are weird. Someone's going to tap into that.
So before we go off in a different direction, I do want to understand the story of deregulation and how the deregulation led to power being concentrated in the speakers. Is it just as simple as the fact that now you can give as much money as you want to the super PAC, and the super PAC ensures that people are elected that already line up with the desires and interests of those who are already in Congress? Because if that's the full story, then that doesn't totally explain why the committee is dead.
So this, the big thing to keep in mind here, and you see it, and I realized this writing this book is when we tell history, we tend to focus on this happened because of this moment in history, where it tends to be a confluence of events, but we focus on the one moment to make the bigger point. Like Lena Khan, I keep saying her name. She's really a symbol of a powerful antitrust movement that's been bubbling for the last 10, 15 years of different actors. So if like I'm focused on Citizens United as like that moment, that was 2010 or something. I could draw it back all the way to 1994 when Newt Gingrich came in and he fired a bunch of committee staff. You know what I mean? Like, but there's little things along the way that got us to this. I'm focusing on like a signifying event, but I'm really glad you made that point because it's never one thing.
And so basically it's the combination of immense amounts of money flowing into campaigns, and then also the fact that the structure of Congress got reorganized so that there was this conglomeration of the way that bills were structured.
Yeah, and like here's like, I mean, I don't think this has been appreciated. Whatever you think of, you're kind of seeing members of Congress fight power for power back. I mean, the whole Kevin McCarthy thing is members of Congress being like, we're not going to go along with it. They wanted to like, he was a speaker before the current speaker. He got deposed.
Oh, I do.
And part of the deal was they cut with Matt Gaetz before they deposed him was, you need to give us some power. We want certain things. We want certain, and then we'll agree to having you be speaker. Like they were fighting for power, like pulling power back. Um, I'm all about people. It's refreshing to see members of Congress exercise their power because so many of them are just so copy and paste. So I mean, maybe this is we'll realize in retrospect, 30 years from now, that was a moment where it started going the other direction. Like, but a much bigger. I've just read a little scholarship on here. There's a whole batch of scholarship here where these moments ebb and flow in American history between powers in the committee structure, and then goes to the speaker, and then goes down, or it ebb and flows between the presidency and the legislative branch. Like that's the kind of beauty of this weird system in America. You have three branches of government, three tiers: the state, federal, and local, and these powers always ebb and flow. Like it's never static, which I actually think. I think that really makes it resilient in a weird way because even from like a monopoly standpoint, I've always assumed the senators from Arkansas or the politicians would be the one fighting Amazon because they'd be doing the bidding of Walmart. You know what I mean? It's like regional power fighting regional power.
But are they?
Kind of. I mean, I would argue Facebook is fighting the TikTok thing right now. I mean, it tends to be. We usually don't realize until after the fact when historians can dig in and see how where money was secretly going. That you kind of find out after. I just kind of I see that in my little world where like oh, I gotta be you just hear stories of like who's behind certain things. Like you never know, but just know that power likes to fight power.
What are the rumors you've been hearing?
Oh, you caught me on that one. You really did. You really caught me on that one. I gotta think of what I can say here because that's the thing about this is I don't view myself as a journalist, and I want people to know that. I view myself. I don't know what I view myself as.
Tune in to Austin Frerick's existential crisis, only on Demystify Say.
No, I know. I view my chapters actually as argumentative essays. I have a point of view, and I want you to know that. What I realized actually in the writing process is I try to edit out polemicism, and that's something honestly from my spouse. It's just that's the beauty. It took me a while, but I think people tend to trust you more. I don't need to tell you I don't need to be over the top. If I just line these facts up in a certain way, I should trust you as a reader how you're going to feel when you read about manure, someone dying, like this kind of stuff. And I think that just comes with time. Because when you first write, you want to write that concluding sentence of how angry you are, but you got to pull back.
Do you have a sense of when politics turned from poor people versus rich people, or let's say peasants and elites, to powers fighting powers and getting people to align on these red-blue issues that have nothing to do with class anymore?
I think the argument I've seen advance is the 70s. It's more became. I kind of how do I say this? I'm collecting my thoughts.
It's a really hard question. I mean, there's no right answer. I'm just curious. I've kind of been picking people's brains about that a little bit, and I have heard people point to that decade. So I'm curious what you.
And I mean, you can kind of open it up a little bit wider too, because we started the conversation from this place of like, there's some sense of class tension that's brewing, and I think that that's a reflection of this question that you're asking, which is that people are suddenly waking up to the fact of just how disenfranchised they've gotten because this fight has sort of become out of reach for them.
I also just feel like the political structures the red-blue stuff doesn't really reflect that anymore. I don't know if it ever did exactly, but the fact that you can get all of like these poor rednecks or farm workers hiring a billionaire as their mascot is very strange to me.
Class is such a weird thing to talk about in America. It's amazing. We don't like talking about it, but it's
Right.
like weird, powerful. But it's like so clear we're in a class, like a low-key old class warfare right now. I mean, to me, especially among white people, you can see it's in body size. Like you signify class based on your body type.
That's really interesting.
That's my personal like hot take there.
So then is
the thing-
Ozempic a class warfare tool?
I think Ozempic is the most fascinating thing right now in the food system, and I cannot figure out I cannot get my head around it. So many people in my family are on it. It's like the most American thing possible. Like, let me take a drug to, you know what I mean, solve something. I think the most fascinating data set right now is Walmart in the food system, because they have your prescription data and they have your grocery data, so they can see what's going to happen. Just what I've seen with people in my family is junk food consumption collapses, alcohol consumption really collapses. People eating more fresh fruit and vegetables. I can't game this one out, because like you're seeing stories now where they're working on pill versions, and dear God, the second they have a pill instead of a shot, we're going to see a ton of people go on it. And if you drop that price down to $50 a month, I don't know how the story is going to play out, to be really frank with you. Like, it's kind of scary. It's kind of fascinating. It reminds me of this really weird short story. You know, there's like certain short stories you read as a middle schooler that you can't forget.
Mm-hmm.
There's this one I remember reading where
It's called Willy Wonka. No kidding.
I should find this one I keep thinking of. Where a store opens in a mall and they sell you milkshakes. They're really cheap. And then a few months later, a new store opens that sells you, like, for an expensive price, you can get weight zapped away, but it puts a little blue dot on your wrist. And at the very end of the short story, people walk around skinny with, basically a band of blue dots around their arm. And I just keep thinking about that, of like, this is kind of what's going on right now. But like, the weird thing with Ozempic is it's like you're seeing this, the classing is weird with it, because yes, the original highest use of it was on the Upper East Side of New York. People with that kind of money. But you're seeing now of like a lot of, and then there's a follow-up story where as its use is broadening and the price is coming down, like Eastern Kentucky has a large use of it, like Ashland, Kentucky, where it's like a lot of people, like they're not poor, but they're just like right above it, are willing to sit there and spend $500 a month for this additional thing. But I don't know. I could talk all day on this, because I don't think people really realize how big this is going to be, and especially in alcohol. Like, you're really seeing alcohol sales crater right now.
Well, there's also this like whole campaign of there's no amount of alcohol that one can drink without taking years off your life, which maybe it's true. I don't know. But I think that there's a lot of advice that's coming out right now that's really trying to dissuade people from it. Hey, really quick interruption. I have to ask you, if you're listening to the podcast and you enjoy what we do, consider coming over to patreon.com/demystifysci and contributing to our project by donating a few dollars a month. In return, you get both episodes early, you get them on Saturdays, sometimes even on Fridays, and you get access to our absolutely phenomenal Sunday chat, which is probably the best thing that happens on the internet every Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific. We get together, we talk about the things that are most pressing in our minds. The last one that we had was a deep dive into consciousness, intelligence, and AI. And if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, patreon.com/demystifysci. I'll see you there.
So I was like racking my brain about this while I was making coffee just now. And this is maybe not a very high level analysis, but the best way that I can understand it is that the red and blue competition that's playing out at the level of Congress or American politics is primarily undertaken by white collar people who have shared interests in the financial decentralization, because almost 100% of those people
Financial deregulation.
Deregulation and decentralization.
Centralization.
Sorry. Damn it. Yeah, centralization.
Deregulation and centralization, yeah.
Yeah, so they have a share. We all of us white collar people, to some extent, are invested in these centralizations. I think is if you have a 401k, if you have, what's another good example? I guess if you have index funds, or basically if you're trying to even beat inflation with investments, you're sort of tied up in seeing the success of these
economic-based projects, which there's a guy with a spreadsheet who's basically like, okay, the numbers go up, great.
And so just to wrap that, it's unlikely that you would see class being a topic amongst these red-blue leaders, because honestly, any reform is going to hurt them, whether they're red or blue. Okay.
And like I was thinking about this too, because I was driving the Pacific Highway, And I was by Long Beach. Remember the big thing where all those ships were backed up a few years ago?
Mm-hmm.
They were like, and I realized it's such a stupid thing. I was like, this is all for Target.
Mm.
Like, I kind of joke, like, white people are they're in like this internal war between like blue and red America, but like the Walmart America and like Target America. Like, sorry, this is like a really simplistic way of boiling these things down, but there's like the professional white America and like working class white America. And like America works for the target consumer. The kids, they live in a nice subdivision, they go to the flagship university. That Target store, most of the stuff is being imported from China. The produce, they don't really care where their berries come from. Yeah, they feel bad that it's a child picking their berries, but whatever. They don't see it. They don't have to confront it. They don't care that our manufacturing supply chain broke or like went offshore. You know what I mean? Like it's like this weird. That's like the really weird thing with the Democrat coalition to like put together. Because at the same time, too, the poorest districts in America are members of are Democrats. Mississippi Delta, the Bronx, all this stuff. So it's a really weird coalition to hold together. And the other way I was thinking about this way this class plays out is I realized on another road trip, the homogenization of culture to the centralization of culture means like inner Maine and coastal Maine are two different things, but like inner Maine has so much in common with like the Arkansas Delta than it does more in common with the Arkansas Delta than it does with coastal Maine from a cultural standpoint and their cultural consumption, their habits, all that kind of stuff.
I've only been to interior Maine. What's the coast like?
It's just like elite Boston bougie, you know what I mean? It's like it's George Bush. The Bushes had Kenny, I can't pronounce it, Kenny Dumport or something, like the Bush compound on coastal Maine. Like it's that kind of waspy money because historically it was before AC. You go north, get in the where it's cooler in the summer.
And so, did you draw a comparison between what you called Target America and Walmart America? Because you were saying that like all of this is for Target, and so does that imply that none of this is for Walmart?
No, I think that was just a weird analogy to make of like in America, with the class warfare stuff, where like I think a lot of the Democrat white base tends to be more Target consumer, and a lot of the Republican white base tends to be more Walmart consumer.
Based off of my experience, that kind of checks out. Like Targets usually are in urban centers, like they're in cities of a certain size, and I feel like Walmarts are usually more in rural places. The large store where you can go to, like we live in a valley, and there's 3 towns, and the largest of the towns has a Target. The smallest of the towns is like kitschy hippies. And then the medium town, which is kind of a gateway to this vast area of progressively smaller and smaller towns, has a Walmart. And so everybody comes into town, and the store that they go to, Walmart.
But Walmart, Target, they're both sort of 2 flavors of centralization, right? And they kind of destroy the people on the bottom in different ways, maybe some shared ways as well. Like, did you see, there was this cool documentary a few years ago about these Walmarts coming into towns and basically just erasing the towns off the map, essentially. Do you remember this? When we were traveling after grad school, I forget who it was. But, it's not surprising that when a Walmart moves into a region, they've eventually displaced all of the local businesses that were providing those services over time. And it's a very...
One of my favorite...
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm getting giddy, sorry. You guys get when I get excited, I talk fast.
Yeah, get excited. It's all good.
I love reading like there's certain academics you just latch onto, and there's this academic from Iowa State who's an old type of economist where instead of like doing theoretical Excel, he just like literally when Walmart came to Iowa, he counted how many men's stores went bankrupt, how many grocery stores went bankrupt, and like just old fashioned bean counting and then putting it into a bigger picture. And his scholarship really showed. When Walmart comes to town, you don't buy more milk, you just shift consumption. And I realized that right in my Walmart chapter is Walmart's goal is to capture every dollar of America's underclass. So it's trying to bring you into the Walmart ecosystem. So it added grocery to get you in the store so you buy more t-shirts or whatever. It's adding in health centers. It's adding in money centers. That's basically tires, pharmacy. You know what I mean? They're constantly trying to like capture that. Like, so I think of them as first killing downtown, then they killed them all. And now their goal is to kill like that big box store, your Party Cities USA type stores.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I felt like those cities, those places are on death's door for a really long time. Like you go through, California has a really big culture of strip malls. Everything's in a strip mall, basically. And so it's just, giant parking lot and then just stores ringing it.
But I feel like this plays into my bigger thesis that the people who are shopping at Walmart like Walmart. Like people who
It's cheap. How could you not like Walmart? Money's tight.
I'm just saying, like, and the people in the white collar, like, elite positions are not in the position to criticize centralization of finance either because they like it. Like,
Or the weird economics of berry production because they want to be able to eat berries every day. Or hell, I want to be able to eat berries every
basically
day. Like, let's not say
class
them.
struggles are a conflict of interest across the board. It seems like it feels like it would hurt everybody to actually go back and fix this stuff.
But like that's like the classic thing, like, oh, let's focus on like dumb cultural issues so we don't actually talk about power and like these class things. I mean, the dirty secret is like now now it's coming for the target American. I mean, they're being consolidated in that space. To your point on Walmart though, I mean, the thing with Walmart to keep in mind is Walmart couldn't have become Walmart if it wasn't for a class of a regulatory framework in the 80s called the Robertson-Patman Act, where if I sell you 100 units, I have to offer you that same price to another consumer. Those laws are basically ignored when the Reagan administration came in.
Wait, say that again.
It's called let me use a different example. It's a term called most favored nations. So Amazon and other Walmart or big entities are known to engage in this practice where whatever price you offer to me, you cannot offer that price to anyone else.
And this is
So
like in terms of like network of suppliers where it's like
Yes.
Walmart's buying from supplier A. Supplier A is like, I'll give you this at 75 cents per unit. And Walmart's like, you can't give anybody else that price. You have to give everybody else a higher price?
Yes. So yeah, and then like there's been a lot of reporting in the Wall Street Journal where what Amazon does, they use bots now to essentially look at other prices, like make sure like there's a whole game going on here. It's illegal. These laws really weren't enforced. That young woman, Lena Khan, literally her last week, I keep harping back to her, filed a case essentially bring back this law where Pepsi was giving Walmart a lower price that it wasn't offering to other grocery stores. Essentially trying to like, it just wants to be like, if you're going to sell 100 units at this price, you have to offer it to someone else. Or even another example is certain sizing. So if you want to buy 100 ounces of something, you have to be able to sell that same packaging for 100. And the reason why this sounds so small, but that power quickly can get out of hand. And so I try to frame every Baron as like a story. And my Walmart story is kind of framed around Amazon, Walmart had been in this like Godzilla Mothra fight. But the other way I thought about framing about Walmart is, and you'll notice I have a section head called it, is I think of Walmart as the closest example in American history to a Soviet Union style Politburo. It's supply and command with Walmart. You do not negotiate if you supply to Walmart. They're just too big. Even Driscoll's, you are 0.00001% of Walmart. You have negotiating power. You have none. I think the most powerful person in the food system is a Walmart buyer because you're buying food for 1 in 3 Americans. And I think a really good example of Walmart's power is I love reading trade press, and it was reading a business publication, Walmart, in Northeast Arkansas, who the whole business as a publication is to what's the news of Walmart and its vendors, because Walmart's in Bentonville, Arkansas, but it's known as Vendorville. It's a lot of import exports of America occur. And Walmart has a rule that if you supply to Walmart, no more than 30% of your sales can come from Walmart. I didn't understand that at first. I had to ask around. And what a grocery store person told me was that's a supply chain risk management strategy. Walmart knows it's such a vulture that you need to get at least 70% of your sales elsewhere, or else you put yourself at the risk of bankruptcy. So it wants you on life support, but doesn't want to kill you. And it even publishes a list of suppliers that are at the level or above it. And think of it as like a waterbed. So sure, you might sell to Walmart at cost or at a loss, but you got to make a profit. So what ends up happening is you start shifting it on to your other grocery stores. So you have to start charging them more. And like it becomes this really weird power game. And it's really scary. And I don't know. I find that really, really fascinating. There's so much there going on. Like a little thing of Walmart will dictate to supply chains what it wants. So it'll be like, well, like for example, famously, it kind of shifted the American manufacturing system to China. And now it's shifting it to Mexico because that's the power they have from their buying power.
And so they're basically just going to Mexican manufacturers as opposed to Chinese-based ones or China-based ones?
Yes, just because of the whole Trump stuff,
Wh-
like shifting.
Oh, on the basis of tariffs?
Yes, tariffs and also like the Chinese state.
I wanted to actually ask you about this because you kind of briefly mentioned NAFTA in the book as being something that's really contributing to the fact that the barons are able to shuffle around their production to the place where it's cheapest and kind of most far away. And I wondered if you could kind of expound on that a little bit. Like, how do you think that when you have this ability to just constantly be pushing things farther and farther away from the communities that normally were supported by this economic activity, is that contributing to all of these problems?
Yes, and like that is a lot of the genesis of that thought comes from Naomi Klein. She's a writer. I wrote my college essay on a book called like I was really obsessed with No Logo in high school. It's about Nike. A part of it is where like Nike doesn't manufacture a single thing. It just brands. So pay someone else to make a T-shirt, puts a little thing on it, and then sells it. And I just found that fascinating. It's one of those things. You're like 16, like whoa.
And by the way, the brand sells not merchandise. They don't advertise merchandise. They advertise what? Being awesome, essentially.
I mean, I should go look at Driscoll's advertising, but I realized it's like Driscoll's doing the same thing. Driscoll owns Nike owns the IP of the shoe, if there is such a thing. Driscoll owns the IP of the berry. They have other people grow the berry. And what you realize is this is the same model. Nike's just doing that sweatshop model where by having other people do it, you can kind of hide behind that veil of labor and environmental abuses. And we know as supply chains get long, transparency collapses. And you just know when you see stories here and there of, one, like the LA Times did a really good series 10 years ago on how a lot of produce in California is shifting south. We're seeing a lot of children now use in the production of these, of picking the produce, because a lot of these are basically plantations, a strong word to hear, but they resemble modern day plantation. Because a lot of California agriculture, because these trade agreements now, how can you cannot compete on price against a model employing children. So we've seen a lot of California actually move into nuts because that's capital intensive. You don't need to pick someone to like pick a pistachio. You just have a machine that shakes it and it catches it. What happens is the person doing it right here, following certain labor and environmental regulations, cannot compete on price. So they exit the market. And that's something I just noticed in Iowa. That's kind of, this chapter was weird because I was combining ideas that I was kind of seeing where like, the thing that got my attention was a stat from like Christian Science Monitor 15 years ago that 70% of apple juice in America comes from China. Like I love apples, and like apples, you can grow them anywhere. And so it's like, what's going on there? And you're like, oh, the most expensive part of apple juice production is paying labor to pick the apple. And you're like, so that's what's happened there. Is like somehow it's because of these trade agreements. I mean, part of it too, for me personally, was unlearning so much language of like, oh, trade is like, you're kind of taught when in college of a certain era, trade is good, blah, blah, blah. The world is flat. Thomas Friedman. You just kind of realize there's really a dark side here. It really is a race to the bottom. Because like loss, when that berry's coming from, Chile, it's not engineered for taste, it's engineered for durability.
Or nutrient content or any of the things that we value in our food. And so, okay, like in the sense that we started this sort of loose thread at the beginning where you said Walmart couldn't have become Walmart if not for the deregulation that happened in the 80s. And we kind of got to the point where you were like, okay, well, so they're able to set all of these prices. And so it's, if they're also now not just setting prices, but picking that like, okay, we're going to move to a different region to be able to manufacture the goods that or switch to suppliers from different regions in order to put stuff on our shelves, then it seems like there's this flattening of the world, like you just said, where you can go anywhere, you can pick any worker, you can find the person who does it for cheapest. is Walmart the epitome of the race to the bottom for just being able to
Yes.
produce things as cheaply as humanly possible?
It's I think too to keep in mind with Walmart is like the king of kings. Like if I had a table of my barons, Walmart's the head honcho. They're the richest family in the world. I mean, Jeff Bezos only owns like 10% of Amazon. The Walmart family owns like around 50% of the company. On top of it, so much of their employee base needs massive amount of government subsidies because they're not paid a living wage. Like I referenced a study that's like 10 years old now. Like the average Walmart employee gets about $5,000 in government assistance. So we're subsidizing the employee base of the world's largest, of also the largest employer in this country. Walmart tried to do this model in Germany and exited the market because Germany made it hold up certain labor. It was it wasn't economically viable with their labor standards.
Okay. Well, so then this is like a really interesting thing because earlier I meant to ask you where you were like, Americans traveled to Europe and all of a sudden they realized that they have a much better food supply system and the food there is of higher quality. And now you're saying that Walmart tries to go over to Europe and it actually can't survive because the labor laws are so strong that they can't use this model where capital accumulates at the top and the bottom is subsidized. So is it just a question of enforcing labor laws?
Yeah,
Is
I
it
mean
that
that's kind of
simple?
like a lot of this is so simple. That's the funny part. Like to that point earlier, treat hog manure like human manure, and a lot of these models break. A lot of them are about cutting corners and evading basic regulations. And the second you start holding them up to pre-existing law, I mean, laws are only as good as their enforcers. And like Lena, imagine if Lena Khan, we start filing all these. Sorry, you start filing all these cases.
We're gonna have to get Lena on the show now.
I know. I love to use her as an example because like that's the dream. An academic writes an article about power that goes viral and it gets power. And like, here's the thing: she's 35 years old. She's just the start of her career, so like, who knows? I also like overemphasize that narrative because like people need to see someone taking on power and winning.
Definitely.
So yes, this stuff isn't complicated. I mean, that is something I have really realized writing this book is there's just a lot of basic things not being forced. But if someone actually were like, here's another example. Iowa has a law in the book called the Packer ban. This law says you cannot own the animal you slaughter. So unbeknownst to most people, most slaughterhouses also are massive owners of the animal. Like the largest owner of hogs in America is also the largest butcher of hogs. This Chinese multinational WH group that also owns Smithfield. You enforce that law that Iowa doesn't enforce, you break up most meat packers in the state of Iowa. Now, if you did that federally, which Paul Wells senators used to do, a bipartisan group of senators, including current Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, you did that nationally, you break up all the meat packers. So, like, there's things to do here, but I mean, part of buying campaign contributions is you're paying politicians to ignore the rules.
There was something quite optimistic that you mentioned with regard to the most powerful people being the actual buyers, the shoppers at Walmart.
No, the buyers at like the Walmart has buyers that buy for Walmart.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the shoppers.
I don't think so.
Okay, yeah, but I was thinking, well, I can riff on that though. Like, I actually do think that there's an interesting thread to all of this. Like, yes, there are perhaps political solutions that should be attempted, but you do have some choice, right? Like, especially the further you move into the elite class about how you spend the money that you have, right? And which companies you actually support and how you actually go about getting your food. Because I feel like in our country, you're giving me this look like you don't want me to not tell this.
The look that I'm giving you right now is that I'm like, I want to argue, but I'm holding my tongue because I think you have an interesting point.
I just think that like the wealthier you are, the closer you are to being able to afford food that doesn't come from these catastrophe situations. Like maybe you can afford to go hunting and hire a guide to take you to get an elk in the Alaskan wilderness, or whatever it is. Honestly, afford the most fancy local grass-fed beef and whatever it is people eat. I feel like you kind of buy your way into the privilege of being able to afford those options that aren't so catastrophic. But is that sensed as a responsibility as you find your way into those echelons as well? I don't know necessarily.
So like yes, you should do all the above. You should do structural things and you should do personal consumption things. I just feel like it's a very boomer neoliberal thing to think your personal consumption will change structures. That's kind of like I try to be like, there's certain food writers for the last few decades have argued use your forks to change the system. And I just don't think that changes the system. It reinforces the bifurcation of the system. Success for me is measured by how do I improve the food quality at Dollar General. I'm kind of sick of like this elite food system. And so like I rather fight for that. And also like the dirty secret is even this like the Whole Foods theory of change, Whole Foods is broken. I mean, that's like the funny thing in the grocery industry is Amazon just is not running it like so. The beauty of Whole Foods used to be it would let the managers kind of do their own purchasing. They would see something in the farmers market, they would buy it, put it in their store. Amazon centralized procurement, and Whole Foods is just not what it used to be. And so you're seeing like a lot of local grocery stores eat into their margins because it's just.
I 100% agree with you. I honestly I keep doing these devil advocate arguments.
No, I knew you were doing it. That was
everybody thinks I'm the devil now.
Shiloh gets me every single time he makes a devil's advocate argument, and I'm just like, ah! But he's just
no, but it's like weird. I used to be really aggressive on attacking that because a lot of people. It's hard to sit there and say you got to act like a collective, and that's why I push people is like you can act like a collective locally. Like focus on proof of concepts. You're not going to like collectively like overturn Congress and the Farm Bill overnight, but collectively, locally, you can get something like that tribal elders box in Wisconsin off the ground. Like that is what people locally can do and do a really beautiful thing and then brag about it. Tell people what you're doing and then grow it. A lot of the best things in America start with pilot programs. You build it up, a few states do it, and then eventually DC does it. And like, but it's weird. It's very much a boomer mentality. And like, I don't want to, sorry, I keep saying boomer, but like, it's something, it's like my personal pet peeve.
Well, the more centralized these agglomerations become, the more intercompetition within their own brand sphere or their own, market share becomes. So you might think you're making choices at the point of sale, but the reality is that it's quite likely whatever piece you choose off the shelf will be feeding the same conglomeration at the end of the day anyways.
Yes.
So there's some deception there that plays into the boomer mindset, I suppose.
Yeah, and a lot of people, first of all, it's hard to know all this illusion of choice. You wouldn't realize, but looking at the peanut butter area, one company has a 50% market share and it's all one company. I love this stuff, so I know it. But at the same time too, and I realize this is talking to the more libertarian types, I think JBS that's my slaughtering baron. This company is ruthless. I mean, I really do think they're the closest thing we have in America today to a criminal organization. And like, I know that sounds outlandish, but like they pled guilty to bribing their way to monopoly level status. Like they bribed over 1,800 Brazilian politicians to get cheap money to become a monopoly. They applied children's slaughterhouses allegedly. They allegedly bribed meat inspectors. They're not going to give you an ounce of market share. So you can try to do something different, disrupt a marketplace, but you will not. They're criminals. They're like arguably criminals. They will like. This isn't the free market will not fix this solution.
And they're so universal, right? I think that was the scariest part of that chapter, which you're like, they have made it so that they're the only ones that are able to slaughter animals. And it really rang true because when we first moved here, we moved to a rural area. Animal agriculture and industrial care of animals freaks me out to the depth of my being. I'm like, if there was something that was a universal evil that everybody kind of participates, it's in our society today, it's that. Like animals that live their lives in cages, animals that never see the light of day. And like, clearly this is like the most evil thing. We're going to find someone local who's producing beef and just order from them. And then it turned into this process where they're like, well, you can buy the side of beef, but there's no slaughterhouses nearby. And so there's people that are raising animals, but raising them for slaughter by these huge conglomerates. And so there's no local market for sides of beef, despite the fact that there's cows down the street.
Yeah. I mean, that's just sad. I mean, you saw it too with COVID when like COVID hit and they couldn't butcher the hogs. This model that it killed millions of hogs because it couldn't, like a normal farm would be like, well, just play in the land another month or two until they're like, things are up and running. But these systems, they're so fragile. They're so, when you can like that's like another think an underappreciated thing is you're seeing this with bird flu. Turns out when you put 1 million chickens inside one metal shed that are genetically similar, you're asking for trouble. And that's what I mean. Like, this is illogical, and like, we can't like, it's not sustainable is not the right word to use. It's gonna break itself. Like in China right now, they're building these massive hog confinements where it's like 10, 20-story hog facilities where like tons of hogs are in there. They have to lock the workers in them because they know the chance of disease is so high. They don't want them interacting with the population because these hogs are so genetically similar. They have to keep the workers in there. It's like that is Mad Max is not the right word to use there, but like it is. You're just asking for another COVID. You're just asking for something to happen like that will break the system.
And it's this is the part where I get really hopeless because I'm like, it is economically more viable for them to build a 10-story hog barn and lock people inside of it than it is for them to figure out how to allow people to actually make a dignified living by raising hogs. Because it's like there's enormous distribution problems that are resolved by having there be somebody like Walmart who's doing all of the buying and helping these large organizations negotiate between, okay, you're raising the cattle, you're slaughtering them, you're packing them, and this gets into our warehouses so that we can sell them at every single one of our stores. Like, that's easy and cheap and fast and efficient. And I think that that's a lot more straightforward than trying to nurture a diverse economy where people are able to get outside of some preordained structure and make a living that they're really proud of. And I really worry about that because I think that these things are culturally transmitted. And so when you break that cultural transmission by having several generations where things go into this industrial landscape, have you completely broken the chain of knowledge in such a way that it's impossible to bootstrap it again?
Don't know. And as you said that, I was telling this to my husband this morning because I'm trying to figure out this new idea I'm playing with. So my buddies and I, we do a trip every year, and we went to the Cajun part of Louisiana, and we were deep sea fishing, which I've never really fished before. Like, why would you fish in Iowa given the water? And I was talking with the fisher. So it's a guy who was our tour guide, he's a fisherman on the week, and this is what he does on the weekends for extra income. And talking with him I realized he has such an ecological view of fishing, of like, he knew the weather based on the upper Midwest, how it's going to impact his livelihood a week from now. And just like knowing the temperatures of the water, like all this kind of like stuff, like understanding how the climate was changing it, and realizing there has to be like some kind of balance there. And then like on a different conversation I was thinking of this summer where a pretty lefty farmer, but still a conventional corn farmer in Iowa, all they can think about was, how do I get the most corn per acre? It's nothing really about the soil quality. It's nothing really about the like, what's this land going to be like 5-10 years? Who's consuming what product I'm making? It's maximization. And I bring this up is because he has this Wall Street Farm Bill brain. It used to be, one year you're doing pasture, you're doing oats, you're taking land out of production, you're letting it rest. You're like, now it's literally maximization of grain. But that's what the system is pushing him to do. So it's changing the way he views. He's no longer having an ecological mindset. He's having this like Excel mindset, whatever you want to call that. Whereas that person down in Louisiana doesn't get the subsidy. You know what I mean? Like, he has to be in touch with the ecological, like the environment, in order to like make a living. And I say this because yes, that's the scariest thing right now is like, do people want to, let's say we put animals back on the land, and let's say, I don't know what the efficiency there is. Let's say only 100 cows per person. Like, that's like kind of the sweet spot. I do think though, there's a lot of people that want to be their own boss. There's a lot of people that just want to go out and do, like, some people just like to work with their hands. And I also am a big believer in, you need to articulate that extreme positive vision because you need to give people hope so they can rush the gates of this moment. Because if you do not articulate that positive vision, people collapse within themselves right now. And sure, we might not get to that 100% of what you articulate of that positive vision, but if you can just get to 80%, that is such a huge progress. And the last point I want to make on that is I also want to be very, very careful here. I don't want to over romanticize the past, especially in the food system. Like the food system in America is rooted in genocide and slavery. There's really never been a multicultural democratic food system. And so like figuring that out is like, how do we take lessons from the past, like treat animals with dignity, but in a way that's like not oppressing the person. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the hope I have too. So it's like this weird, I don't know. I kind of default to, I don't know the answer to your question, but I rather try.
In your research, have you come across people that are doing regenerative agriculture that you think are working out really well and that they're able to operate within the system and actually evolve in a positive direction?
Yes, and that's why I think I have the hope is like the pride people have when they do that work is just something that's so much work now in America. You don't have pride. It's that I saw that my mom. You kind of see that in my coffee chapter when I talk about my mom's bakery. There's no coffee being native to Iowa. People came to my mom's coffee shop because of the relationship she built with them. But then when she managed a Starbucks, they took away all her local control. Like they told her literally where to put everything on the shelf. These regenerative farmers, most of them are running uphill. The system is designed to run them into bankruptcy. They're not getting any farm subsidy, but they love what they do. They love the animals. They love thinking, what am I going to do with the land this year? I mean, what new crop am I going to try? That's where the best innovation comes from. Like, and there's a lot of people. It's a little bit like I kind of also view like this like cooking. I really want to bring back the art of cooking. A lot of school meals anymore is just you're paid by the hour to make frozen food, and like some people just want to work with their hands and make from scratch meals. And there's a lot of dignity that you get with that work, and there's scholarship out there, but also I feel like that's just something you inherently feel like. I don't know about you, but like when you like spend 2 or 3 hours on like a pie or something, someone eats into it and they tell you it's great. That's a great feeling. And I feel like so much work has lost that meaning in America.
Yeah, definitely. You were going to say, Shane? I saw you.
A couple of things, but I completely agree with that. I mean, the detachment of one's source of income from what one enjoys doing or finds rewarding is one of the steepest hills to climb, I feel like, in life for everybody, especially in this like modern American capitalist landscape. It's like, how do I align how I like to spend my time? That's probably the greatest difficulty for people, like kids coming up, anybody in America these days, right? Is the things that pay, right? The email job that pays isn't probably what you like doing with your hands all day.
That and like it's that pride and that drive is what drives innovation, and that's usually what's lost in moments of consolidation. Is like you're trying to people that enjoy something are just going to play around and try new things, and like that's where just even dumb like little food creations, that's where they come from usually. It's I don't know, one little example that comes to my head right away is I love Houston. To me, has one of the most fascinating food scenes in America. It's one of the most diverse immigrant populations. I remember eating at a place where it literally was a couple where it was a Cajun person married a Vietnamese person, so they're making like Cajun Vietnamese food. And you're like, that's cool. That's really innovative and really fun and flavorful. Also, like that to me is the best of America, is the clashing and melding of those different cultures.
Yeah, that's basically where all good music comes from too, for what it's worth. It's these like collisions that result in quantum leaps in creativity. But all right, I want to make sure, did we hit all the solutions on your list here? So we talked about giving the land back to animals, subsidy revision, campaign finance reform.
Enforcing regulations.
Yeah.
I would
add,
regulations, yeah.
The big one to think about is using the power procurement to drive supply chain change. What I mean by that is like schools, colleges, jails, they buy a lot of food. Putting a local regenerative green pepper in a Dollar General is not going to change anything because right now it's artificially high compared to like the one picked by a child in some other country. But you help schools buy local because a lot of farmers will tell you privately they don't like doing the farmers market. It's not consistent. You get rained out. It's a lot easier to know every week I'm delivering X amount of carrots to said college. keeping your money local. It's better tasting, less, climate miles. But you're stabilizing them, and you're also letting new market entrants, because you don't want, the goal here is not to make new carrot barons. It's like, how do you make a bunch of people doing this, like copy and paste it, so you can build up those ecosystems. And it's because you can't just like flip this overnight. Is you got to phase out this old one and let this new one rise at the same time. And I really do think the procurement power of these institutions can help do that. And it's also good politics. Like, who doesn't want all beef served in Iowa coming from Iowa beef farmers on pasture? And it's feel good. And a lot of schools are doing this, by the way. How do we help them do it more? And this is something anyone can do locally.
There's a frame that you might really enjoy, which we had a guy on the show a while ago who studies the harmonic patterns of consciousness through psychedelic experiences. His name is Andres Gomez Emilson.
I don't know how you managed to bring DMT into this conversation, but here we go.
Well, he has this he has this frame
it's
that
a good point, though.
I love so much. You know what? Do you want to do this spiel? You know this spiel just as well as I do.
You're having so much fun, though.
All right. Well, so when you take DMT, when you take these really powerful psychedelics, you go into this other realm, and the realm is filled with entities. And all of the entities have a certain character that's associated with them.
Well, hold on. Can I pause you for a second? No other drug seems to drive people to have such a shared experience of encounters with entities as DMT. I've never done this myself, honestly. Maybe I will at some point, but users, like 90% of users that have what they call a breakthrough experience, so they actually have full-blown hallucinations, encounter these entities. And so it's a very homogeneously reported experience. It's worth noting. This isn't just like
this isn't just like some guy in San Francisco who's like, I see things. It's like, Shiloh's totally right. This is like a universal characteristic of the experience. And he's like, they appear to come in two types, where you're basically seeing these shapes that are in textures and patterns in your field of vision, where it's like the room is in front of you, but then it kind of starts to fade out, and your field of view is occupied by these patterns. And he's like, there's two types of patterns. There's the type of pattern that, and he calls them entities, which appear to just be joyously individual and independent. So you look at them and there's something beautiful and there's something intricate.
They're like exploring new possibility spaces, new combinations, trying to make new patterns.
And then there's another kind which you look at, and all of a sudden when you look away from them, they pattern the entire field of vision according to their shape and behavior. And he's like, these are really weird and sticky because once you look at them, they overtake everything. Their entire functionality appears to be to just agglomerate and turn everything into copies of themselves. And so he's come up with this frame of like team consciousness versus team replicator. And he's like, we need to focus on a world that builds up team consciousness, because team replicator appears to be very powerful, and it's kind of anti-human in some sense, because it takes this massive, beautiful, riotous experience and just smashes it into this uniform shape that it wants everything to be like. And I feel like for what you're talking about, team replicator versus team consciousness is just, every time I go out into the world and I just see this dichotomy all over the place. And so I just wanted to give you that frame.
No, I love that when you started going down that road, it reminded me, I'm obsessed with this notion of I just like thinking like a crockpot. I'm also like, it's my Midwestern showing. But I say that is because the best moment for me personally in this book was just long walks with my husband, where we would just workshop this language, workshop these ideas, and you just stew on them like on drives, and like hearing like it. You gotta let different things clash. Like hearing how you can how this one thing I said reminded you of this academic, you know what I mean? Like, and so you relay ideas, and like that is. I think we live in such an era where everything's about regurgitation and like not that original clashing of thinking. And it's that clashing of thinking where like I realize like, oh, like Driscoll's is like Nike. You know what I mean? It's such a weird thing to think. But you have to, it's like the simmering of the ideas is where you kind of get you get the new magic.
Yeah.
Hence the case for multiple combinations. on the team consciousness level.
Yeah, because it's like the vitality and the vibrancy of the environments in which we play and work and think and act is the thing that at the end of the day is going to decide how successful we are as a culture. And to me, this is like very personal because I come from a family of, my family immigrated 4 times before we came to the United States. So like the United States was our third jump. We came from the Soviet Union, we lived in Israel, we lived in Canada, then we moved to the United States. And I look back many generations of my family, and it's people that have always had to leave. Like something bad happens. Like the Red Army's at the gates, the Holodomor is starting, the Nazis. Like at every step, it's just like, Christ, okay, we're going to pack our bags and we're going to run. And to show up and to suddenly be an American, to have an American citizenship, you can look at it and you can be like, okay, we'll just go somewhere else. And yeah.
No, I just like that is I think that's the beauty of diversity though, is like so like my husband has similar stories as yours. You know, they're German Jews, Holocaust, like that, or Kristallnacht, I should say. And like my family is not. Like we lived in the same place for 7 generations. You know what I mean? Like we don't know we live in a homogenous society. We don't know what it is like for things to go wrong. And it's having us come together and me and him clash over that. Like he sees my naiveness, he gives me a little bit of cynicism. We kind of workshop these ideas. And like I've always viewed the beauty of America as like a gumbo. It's not a stew, it's a gumbo where you need the different ingredients. Here's another good example. I think the one I just toured West Point over New Year's Eve and I loved it. I thought it was beautiful. It's a military academy. But the beauty of American society is we have West Point and then we have like Reed College in like Portland, Oregon. You want a society like Reed College for people that might not know. It's like super crunchy liberal arts, really small classes, and you basically are conditioned to challenge everything. And you really want, and then whereas like West Point is all about conformity, you really want a society where you're producing these two different types of mindsets so they can clash. Because you do need, I don't know, whereas like a lot of European systems don't have that. And I really like that educational model because like that's the beauty of America is the clashing of these different models, these different production models. If that makes sense.
And I think that the American experiment is one that is really worth protecting and supporting and devoting yourself to. Because for all of the problems and the monopolies and monopsonies and technocracies and oligopolies and just all of these things that bear down upon us as we try to make our way through it, it's like you have to have something that you fight for that's meaningful and it allows you to have a sense of pride for what you've built. And if we're all these, rootless cosmopolitans, then you lose the ability to have something that you've made that you can stand for. And I think that that's what I'm trying to say is that like the historical urge that I've seen in my family has been one that, okay, shit's going really bad, like we have to go. And I think that I'm probably the first in a long line where I can actually be like, okay, well, shit's kind of bad, but I think that we can stay and I think that we can make it better. And that's very cool. And that's why I liked your book, because it narrows the vision of the world down to these tangible pieces.
So I'm glad. Oh man, this is so fun. But my sin, like your darkness that your ancestors have, you can see it in the coffee chapter. I'll just be blunt. When I'm like, that chapter was the hardest to write, and I was determined to write it because I really want to make the point, especially now in the state of the world and America, that monopolists finance fascist, and that has been lost in history. Like after World War II, Congress commissioned a study. How did it happen? That was one of their key findings, and what they really focused in on was IG Farben. Hitler's largest donor was this chemical company. Hitler would walk into a room. I don't mean those crazy things. Let me help you sell product. They gave him a big check. The Congress report said that check made the dreams of my come true. They ended up supplying him the chemicals used in the chambers. I can have that mindset. I can be very dark, and I want to like people to know that. But I really do believe in the American experiment. I think there's like beauty to be had in a nation not rooted in ethnicity, but rooted in an idea of like living your truth. That is very rare. And I think that's the beauty of going abroad. I really like, I just remember being like going abroad in like northern Italy and realizing like North Africans will never maybe be Italian because of their skin color. Sorry if that offended anyone, but like, and America's going through this. I mean, it's not. I don't know. I'm glad you picked up on that in the book because like I fight those feelings all the time. Because there's trust me, when I'm in those like suburban strip mall parking lots and I have to walk through 8 lanes of traffic to get a cup of coffee, I'm not the biggest fan of America.
I mean, I think that it is something worth fighting for. The observation that you made about Italy is, I think that it's, whether or not it's offensive to somebody, I think that it is accurate. Like, Italy is a country that has honed what it means to be Italian for generations. And like, even out here, so we live in Oregon, and there's people out here that identify your Oregonness on the basis of whether or not your family came on the Oregon Trail. Like, those are the real Oregonians. And I'm like, okay, well, that's been 200 years, 300 years max. Now extend that to like 5,000 years of history that defines whether or not you're Oregonian or not, or which is the case in Italy because your families have been there for that long. Like, you lose the ability to onboard other people into a culture if your culture is like, okay, well, we've lived on this plot of land for the last 15 generations.
That's the default of humans, and I think the challenge for leaders is how do you move beyond that?
Well, it's America's a meme. Like,
I love that America being. I think that's the best version of America is the one you articulated, but it comes with a lot of baggage too, right? Like, we overthrow countries and assassinate world leaders, and that gets into like really weird territory because all that seems really evil and stuff. But then also I kind of full circle on it sometimes, and I'm like, holy shit! What if that's what's necessary in order to uphold the ideal that you can have a country made out of a dream?
I mean, even the simple fact of like, I was listening to, I think it was The Daily mentioned this the other day, The Daily or the Vox podcast, where it's like, we are producing the most fossil fuels ever in the world history. And we all know it's a climate crisis. I don't, you have to acknowledge the moments for what they are, but what are you going to do?
and I think that that's what's possible here more maybe than it is anywhere else, where it's like there's a guy who runs a really interesting YouTube channel called Peter Santinello.
Oh.
And he basically just drives around to rural places, off the beaten path places, and interviews the people who he finds there. And so he's been doing this extended coastal tour of California where he's going to the poorest county in California. He went to a place called Cecilville where there's a guy who used to tour with the Grateful Dead who stopped being, like, his band toured with the Dead, who left the rock star world and became a homesteader. And there's one particular episode that I'm thinking of where he ends up somewhere in the Shasta area. And he has this kind of crunchy granola dude who's his tour guide through Shasta. And so he's like taking him around. And apparently there's, like, people think aliens live on Shasta. And there's all these like religious cults.
Inside of Shasta.
Is it? I thought that, I have no idea. Somewhere on Shasta there's aliens. But he ends up at this bus. And out of the bus comes this dude who's German. And the guy there's this German living in the woods outside of Shasta in a school bus with some girl that he met in like Sedona. And now they're just doing this driving around homesteading lifestyle, trying to find a place to settle. And the guy's like, could you have done this in Germany? Like, could you have lived in a bus in the woods in Germany? And the guy's like, absolutely not. Not in a million years. Like, there's not a culture of it. Like, there is an immense possibility here where, yeah, you can fall off the edge of the map and you can end up in Skid Row in Los Angeles living through hell on earth because there's no social safety net and we don't take care of the poorest and the most vulnerable and fentanyl is in everything and people are just being destroyed by it. But you also have the ability to fall off the map in kind of like a beautiful, weird, creative way where you're living in a bus and you're touring around the country and trying to figure out what it looks like to build something that's meaningful to you. And I think that most countries don't have that. And I think that that's a thing that's really worth fighting and protecting.
The one thing I'll come full circle in a second, was I mentioned earlier how I edited out a lot of the polemicism. And I realized my original writing was like that because the current media systems, they incentivize extremism in terms of language. So so I used to be a paper boy. I've been a newspaper junkie since I was like 12. Every newspaper had to sell usually you're trying to sell to both sides of the aisle, and you're trying to curate community. Like you had professionals deciding, here's what's important on the front page. Let me introduce this new immigrant who opened a restaurant. Like you're building community, doing all that kind of good stuff. That model collapsed, and these rage machines filled the void. And I realized, from a rhetoric standpoint, I was becoming edgy with my rhetoric, like aggressive, polarizing. And then it was honestly started doing these speaking things a few years ago when I view public speaking as almost like stand-up comedy. You're putting rhetoric out there, you're seeing how it's interpreted. You quickly realize anytime you're in like a niche profession, you have your own language that most people don't know. And so you can read it on the audience. And I realized the language that I was getting from social media is not where people are. And it's also like from a goal, given that I'm also like basically like an advocate for like these argumentative essays, my goal is to build the biggest coalition possible. So how do I write something that both, Elizabeth Warren type, Maha, Glenn Beck, whatever, how do you make the biggest tent possible instead of I'm right, you're wrong? Which is like, we live in such a binary that, and I put this in the same category as Ozempic. I think social media is breaking down in front of us because it's mostly garbage. And like, that's the beauty of the podcast is God, we've been talking for a few hours now. What a much more richer conversation than me tweeting out, but it's shifting. I don't know. I don't know where the media is going in America, but these are choices we make and people are responding to it in a certain way. I don't know. That's kind of a ramble, but
I'm scared the podcast can't replace public speaking, though. I think you're really tapping into something because I have that same, what's the word? I get the same benefit from teaching students that I can't get from talking with scientists because I'm actually able to sense the way that I'm communicating these ideas in a real-time sense. It's just like stand-up comedy. Like people are either laughing or they're not. And the same thing happens when you lecture too. You can either see whether your formulation of an idea is hitting or not. And especially in science, we're always trying to push the edge of how we understand nature. And so we're full of new ideas all the time. As hopefully the best scientists are constantly chewing over new ideas. And if you don't have that real-time interaction with people, you can't be sure that you're actually doing justice to the idea space that you're trying to represent. And so this is one thing that worries me is, teaching is a huge commitment. It takes a ton of time. Honestly, you're saying the same stuff more or less year after year. And on one hand, and you don't get paid at all. And so it's like there's a mass migration out of universities, especially for teachers, like people who formerly would have made their bread and butter teaching. And I feel that same pull myself too, because it's not really worth my time on paper. But at the same time, it seems like it strengthens me as a thinker and as a scientist and as an artist and as a communicator and as a stand-up comic or whatever the hell I'm trying to do, right? Because you can't get that just talking to the void. Like there's probably thousands of people listening to this right now. And if they were here, it would be a very different experience. But they're going to just receive the download of this information, unfortunately. And I don't see a way around that except for taking these things on the road or something to that effect.
100%. It's just kind of, I really got into listen to a lot of comedians' podcasts. That's why I keep thinking of stand-up. And they talk about, like, you don't really make your money. You make your money by doing, a lot of them, like, when they do the big tours. But you can't just go on tour. You have to own your set. You do a lot of these little things. You workshop the language. And you realize like you might lose money on one thing, but you'll make it elsewhere. Or like this kind of not money. I don't want to think that way, but like you do something that helps you in a different space. And like for me personally, like my best rhetoric comes from I really want to sell animals on pasture. And it was really hard to like I kept distilling that idea until I got that great soundbite and put animals back on the land. I love it because like my whole goal too is I want to own the middle. Like the system we have now is radical, and I know how generally reformers are painted as crazies. Like I'm a young gay man that went to Grinnell College. Like that's a very lefty, hippy dippy. I don't want to be portrayed that way. So like I want to have my rhetoric like I don't want to be like Berkeley foodie elite. I want to like own the middle. So like, how do you that language only comes from like what you're saying, talking to the class, and like, sure, it might not straight up benefit you at that moment, but I know just from experience how much it's better made me. And I should also say it's also taught me like where I was just wrong. I used language I shouldn't use, or like the example I'll never forget was 10 years ago. I used to open with like baby formulas really concentrated, and I made an offhead quip a few times where, oh, well, you should breastfeed anyways. So a mom came up to me afterwards and go, like, just like told me like how she didn't appreciate that. Like, you know, she has her own issues. And like, I wouldn't know that. And like now I will, because that person came up to me, looked me, and I can tell with sincerity the issue she had with that. I will not use that again. You know what I mean? And like, sometimes you just got to eat it. And like, it's not, I don't need to get mad. That person had good intentions, and I could tell that person had good intentions. So my language changed. And like I just had this other example, and I actually used this language earlier, and I probably shouldn't have. I recently spoke in Canada in Saskatoon at one of these rubber chicken meals in a hotel basement. And I talked about how there's never really been a multicultural democracy. And someone came up to me afterwards and told me about the Native American heritage here. And like, that's something like, I think as an American, I think one of the big things in America we haven't really grappled with is Native American issues, where Canada seems much more in the forefront there. Mm-hmm. And now, like, you know, I mean, I'm thinking more about it, and like, my apologies for using that language earlier, but that is something like, as I move forward in my new writing, I'm gonna like try to incorporate that. Sorry, that's like a weird tangent, but I tell the people out there listening, like I hated public speaking, but at some point, it's not. I don't know. I enjoy it. Like I really enjoy it. Like it's pretty. I don't stress over it anymore.
I think that there's no way to really build a coalition if you aren't thinking about what gets people to hear the ideas. And it's really amusing to me when I hear people bitching about, oh, political correctness and language policing and all these things. And I'm like, okay, so you're saying that you shouldn't care about people's emotions and the reactions that they have when you tell them something that is peripheral to your point? Like your point is X. And in the process of delivering point X, let's say you say things that get people distracted from point X. Like, surely if your stated goal is to just get people upset, then fine. Don't care about the language, don't care about the message, don't care about the shape of the envelope, right? Like, if you think about the way that like a synthesizer works, there's you can put a really jagged, aggressive envelope generator onto a sound and make it piercing and difficult to listen to, or you can smooth it into something that is actually mellifluous and pleasant. And it's the same underlying sound, you've just modulated the way that you're presenting it. And I think that there's been, like you said, there's been so much rage bait and division, and people spend so much time honing their just like incredibly aggressive rhetoric, that actually getting in front of a crowd and being like, well, no, we're building something that's not based in that. We're building the future. We're not depressing you. We're not telling you that everything is hopeless. We're not ignoring the successes of the past. We're pushing towards something more optimistic. I think that's where to go.
Yes. And I think just like two from like a high level is, how do we build systems that where future generations don't have to deal with this? But also I think for
I don't think it's
our
possible.
cohort, how do we unlearn them? Like for me, it took me about a year or two of like not engaging with people with bad intentions. Like, this is so stupid, but like, dear God, I check Goodreads every day to see book reviews. And it took my husband, you just have to learn, when someone gives you a really snarky, mean, whatever, it never ends well. Like, sure, you want to spat off. What I do now is I write it, I take a screenshot, send it to him, and I walk away. Because these things never end well. And you just have to unlearn the platforms. There's so much science into these platforms to get you to do that. They're engineered for you to do that, but it's so personally destructive.
And that's not how reality is, too. Like, if you're actually dealing with people in a public forum, that's not how people behave. There's something about the internet that just turns people into these bizarre versions of themselves with no filters. It's like everyone's had like 5 pints of beer before they start talking. It's not real at all.
It really makes me think about just how the the conglomeration of the social media landscape is doing the same thing to our mental space as it's done to our food space, where it's like there's a different set of incentives at play, but it's still intentionally trying to get you to commit more time and energy to an atmosphere that doesn't exist elsewhere in the world. You go talk to somebody at the grocery store. They don't talk like they do on the internet. They don't hold opinions like they do on the internet. But I don't know, Austin, we've talked for a while. Do you have something that you want to wrap on, Shiloh?
I don't know. I mean, it's just cool to have this solution space available to chew on.
Yeah.
I'm going to try it out on some of the next economists that we've run into. Been doing a lot of economists on the show lately. And, I think that economists always want to see financial solutions for everything. And yeah, go ahead.
No, I want to interrupt because like this is like nerd hour. My book really is real sociology intellectually. Like that's the discipline I'm pulling a lot from. And that discipline was really rooted in power. It's just like there's no math formula for power. Power is like a confluence of events. And you have to it's not just you have to look at the math formula, but you also have to look at the history. You have to look at the sociology. You know what I mean? The anthropology. It's like respecting intersecting disciplines and how they come together to show something. It's like the liberal arts of it all. Like these are holistic conversations. We're talking food is holistic. Like you just can't getting people to pull back from the economics it shouldn't be the end all be all.
I think power is just really alienating to people at a ground level because your household doesn't, ideally, I hope anyways, that your household doesn't operate based on power, right? And so like your daily life and your friendships, I mean, these things don't operate on the same balance that these large conglomerations and political structures operate on. It's like a totally different rule set for life. And I think that makes it really hard for people to relate to fundamentally. It's like if my marriage was based on power, it would be a freaking nightmare because like one of us would be, the
Total
Germany
war.
after World War I all the time. You know what I mean?
You could trade it off.
But we joke, my husband and I, a good marriage is like 1 + 1 = 3. There's just more going on there, and you can never really articulate that. And I don't know. It's I'm laughing because he's gonna laugh when I tell him that.
It's not zero sum, but I think a lot of these power discussions we've been having today are zero sum to some extent. Like that's what I was trying to bring up after the break was that by fixing a lot of these things, everyone takes a punch in the pocket, ostensibly, even though the benefits might not be on the ledger system and they're still worth doing. It's hard to compare the cost of clean air versus, a better retirement package or something.
So I want to push back on that. So that is the one ground I intentionally will never concede is price. Is they're shifting the cost. That's all. It's kind of a ledger, like the manure stuff. Instead of the baron paying for the cost of their production, their pollution, we're paying for it. Like it's been econ has a term called negative externalities.
Yeah.
They shifted that. That's all. So much of this model is.
But you think you can price those all the time, or they're unlisted?
You can build it. If you push the price, if you push negative externalities into the price, I think you break a lot of these models.
Can you price like a crappy working conditions? I mean, can everything be priced? I guess that's the thing I'm skeptical of. Is what I'm trying to say.
No, I guess my example, my thing is rooted in like the manure thing, like the pollution from the hog system, ignoring what it does to the animal, what it does to the worker who has to go in that, it's shifting it onto people in Iowa who are now dealing with a water crisis. By shifting that cost to the actual hog baron, his model breaks. By just, that's kind of what I mean is less, I don't want to, but that's really a question over power. Like he used his economic power to corrupt the political system to lock in his economic dominance. And kind of going back to the conversation we had a little bit ago about politics, you're never going to beat him on price and in money and power. You need to lean into the political theater. Like people like Julie Dunn, she puts on a show. You know what I mean? Like you attack the baron, you call out their stuff, you leak stuff to journalists. Everything you read in the news, especially in the New York Times, usually someone pitched it to that journalist. I can't say this enough. The single best thing you can do as a person is to let a journalist know. Like see something, say something. And this is a really graphic example, but it hits it home really well. You know the movie Fargo, the mulch scene?
Yeah, where he's putting the
About
guy
10
in the wood chipper.
Yes. So about 10% of pigs die inside these facilities. So one person in Western Iowa was taking the 10% pigs and throwing them into his mulcher and just throwing the parts onto the field. That's illegal. This old woman in Iowa saw it, was called the state. The state didn't do anything. So you know what she did? She called local TV news. And they did a big story. It was all over the local news because like that's so graphic and awful. And then finally the state was forced to act. He had to pay a fine. No longer does it. And it's because that one woman sent an email. That is like the power of theater. Like I think this moment demands theater. It is put on a show, attack power. Like that is my goal with this book here. Is I just want to put like this dairy baron can never like people now know that someone died on his operation. And like that, it's also fun. It's fun to do theater. It's fun to leak stuff. It's fun to like. I mean, I had there was another person I profiled in my dairy baron, older woman who was fighting my dairy baron. She actually had me write her out of the story. She's like, I do this because it's the right thing to do. I don't want people to know who I am. First of all, that's a beautiful thing to hear. You know what I mean? Like that's a good person doing the right thing. But that is what this moment is like. Lena, you gotta.
Lena.
Sorry, I know, but here's the thing: she lost a lot of cases, but she also won a few, and you just got to start slogging, because it's gonna be, it's like the worker abuses. It's really hard to tell these stories, but once you start seeing stories of kids picking berries, it's just you can't unsee it.
Yeah, I think that that's maybe the future that you're talking about, where you're like, well, I don't really know what happens to the media ecosystem. Like, where do people go to read these stories, and where do people go to see this stuff? And I'm like, everybody's got a cell phone. Everybody's in some way this like dyed-in-the-wool junior correspondent that's like, hey, I live here. I've noticed this. I want people to see it. Like there was I don't know if you saw, there was this big study called Plastic List where they tested the endocrine disrupting chemical content of lots of foods in the Bay Area, and basically showed that there's, like, there's just plastic in food.
Not just inert plastic either, like hormone disrupting teratogens and
It
doesn't even make sense. It's in like Whole Foods and it's
I can
bars.
send you the link of this. It cracked me up because actually the Fairlife, your dairy baron, tops the list on a couple of the milk products for plastic content and like phthalates and endocrine disrupting chemicals and stuff like that.
Even in glass bottles.
Oh, well, no, the Fairlife stuff is like, it's this like super filtered milk, and so I think the plastic is probably coming from the filtration process.
Yeah, there might be a special milk bottle. They have customized look special. And then here's one little example that came to my head of like really good guerrilla theater. I think that's been underappreciated is, as a society, we mock the PETA type people, but them throwing paint on fur, you don't see runways with fur anymore, really. I get the sense that fur and fashion's kind of gone away because it became, they want to deal with those guerrilla type people. So like that's, you know what I mean? Like success, that's a weird, and like another example too is like a lot of the anti-industrial animal people have really shifted a lot of, they're pushing, the egg industry is actually not that consolidated, and a lot of eggs now are cage-free. It's not great, it's not ideal, but it's a lot better than the previous system. And that was because a lot of the shaming they did. So like there is success out there, and I don't know. We don't really realize success till afterwards, or we don't usually applaud it, but like the fur example to me is a really good example of that.
I like the idea of a culture of theatric shaming. Like I think that's probably along the lines of things that I would get behind. I think you gotta tell people that what they're doing is messed up. And I think that people have to have a strong sense of what's messed up. And if we don't talk about it, because there's a really interesting feature of American culture, which is the like to be cool.
Yes.
Like that's uniquely American. It's an American export that has been transmitted.
And like I get to choose my own morality business as well.
Not only that, but like caring too much isn't cool. Thinking that things are right and wrong like isn't cool. Like having a stern moral structure is not cool at all. And so there is this tendency of, I think, just wanting to not get involved with it because it breaks this ephemeral, unaffected structure that Americans have through Hollywood, through culture, learned to enact in their own lives in order to maintain this facade.
Well, part of that is getting away from that bowling for alone is, we have such an epidemicness of loneliness, is you need to be part of a group because you can't fight these barons alone. Like, to add on to Julie Dunn's story, she's part of a group called Iowa CCI. And one of their big things is a bunch of pissed off old ladies in Iowa get together to fight industrial animal agriculture. Is it creates a sense of community. Because, like, here's the thing, they lose most of their battles. But this is her group. And it just takes a few victories. Like, she'll stop a confinement here, she'll stop one there. But it's also just like, that's her poker night, And like, we need to get back to that. I mean, that is the water park hotel I mentioned earlier in Wisconsin. I mean, it was a beautiful thing to see because they have a whole system of how they decide their policy where each county has a different representative. People vote, they get dressed up, they get elected, they argue in a room what the policy is going to be. Instead of just being top down, this is what our policy is. It's like this democratic organizational method of dictating policy. And like, people just want to be part of something, especially as we move away from church. Join an organization, join a board, but you can't do the theater alone.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable advice. There's a lot to digest here. What are you working on next? I mean, like you said, you spent 5 years working on barons. Do you have like a bunch of other projects cooking already?
Kind of. So I will be adding. So the book will have a paperback coming out. Hasn't been set yet, but I will add a baron. I'm adding Cisco. It's a food distribution company.
That's exciting.
This is okay. I want people to buy my book. I love this chapter though. I'm like I feel like I'm a kid who's 5 days away from Christmas. I can't give too much out because, first of all, I just gave it to my fact checker, so I don't want to say something that's not correct because it has to go through that process. But I'm really excited about that. And then I don't know. I've been kind of toying with a second book. I really want to almost do the opposite of barons, where I almost want to focus on food systems that work. So, for example, like people love Kerrygold butter. It's like this Irish-made butter, and the New York Times is rated #1 butter in America, or you can buy. And here's the thing: it's just the way we used to do butter in America. But I want to study that regulatory system. Like kind of like maybe that I might do like Alaska salmon because they don't do corporate farming up there. I might do I have a whole list: South Korean kimchi, Colombian coffee. Like I want to focus on the positives, but also basically the book is kind of like a pro-regulation book without saying those words, because we know this moment's going to break, but like what I realized, and this is like classic America, there's not a lot of comparative scholarship here. Like, what's a good food system?
Yeah.
And no one has a perfect one, but like, can we take some from here, take something from there? Like Kenya has a really good program to preserve its history, its food history that I was just reading about. So like, can we talk about that? I also like, from like a personal standpoint, that's where my head wants to be for the next 2 years. It's just the positiveness, because I could write a bunch of other dark books, but why? Why give 2 years of the one life I have?
Absolutely.
I think that's what's actually most valuable. It might not be the tastiest headlines, but if things that orient you towards making better decisions in your own life, like, you have to realize the solution set and
to know that it's possible. I mean, honestly, I think that that's really, we've gotten to a point where everybody sees that it's broken. Everybody kind of knows.
And to Shiloh's point, there's our conversation earlier about audiences and like teaching. I can just tell from my audiences, post-election, people are so nihilistic right now. And I have to overemphasize my hope because that's what they need. And I don't want to add more darkness to like another human right now. Like, I love Spirit Away. It's like a classic movie. And I think of No Faced all the time. I don't want to do that. And I'm having this kind of fight right now with the book, and like people I'm talking to is they're not doing what I'm doing. Whereas like, they're not doing the rubber chicken circuit. And so I can just tell audiences, I can just, my instincts tell me that's what people want. And so like, I'm even having to fight that, where people who aren't doing that are telling me what to do. It's like, it's a classic, whatever, but like, I could probably make more money selling a darker book, but I don't want to go down that road.
I'm always surprised that people actually don't need reminded of what's broken with respect to an extant paradigm that's failing. Like, I thought when I first started doing all of this science, essentially, like we talk about a lot of cutting edge ideas that are not widely accepted. And I've learned over the years that people don't really need talked out of the old idea as much as you probably think they do. Like, you can actually start with a more salient solution, and very often the reader will not feel cheated because in some sense they already know things are broken, like Nastia said.
Yeah, I think starting from the point of, hey, this is what works. Isn't this cool? Look at the successes and the victories and how well the people live inside of these systems, and this is how they made it happen.
That, like, the power of humor. Like, this is a weird, like, the guy who did The Producers, who's that famous, like, Hollywood writer? You know what I'm talking
Mel
about?
Brooks?
Yes. I believe his family are Holocaust survivors, or he has that history to him. And he talked about, like, the best thing you could do to Adolf Hitler is make a joke of him. And, like, that's kind of part of my Barons, is like using this robber baron framework. Is they're so cartoonishly, this is so cartoonish. It's cartoonishly corrupt, cartoonishly bad. The fact that my dairy baron currently resident at the Ritz Carlton, Puerto Rico, that's funny. Like, that's morally wrong. And, like, by doing that, by taking them down a peg and making them buffoons, I feel like you're weirdly empowering the reader. Like, oh, because we've also tackled this before in our history, we know what to do here. Whereas instead of being scared of them, they're just bubbas.
I love that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think comedy is a way underappreciated weapon and art form in the landscape of tools available to the activist, let's say, or the person who's concerned about the future of the world. By the way, who have you been seeing local comedy when you travel, or like you said, you guys were listening to a lot of comedy lately? Who are some of your favorite comedians?
Sam. Oh my God, you're putting me on the spot. I love.
I'm sorry.
No. I'm really bad at pronouncing names, so I'm always.
It's all good.
Fat Ras.
I'm just looking for recommendations. This is totally personal. We can edit it out.
No, but I love it because you know what? Here's what I love about podcasts. It made me appreciate that craft.
Yeah.
I kind of view it like drag. Like, I love drag queens because they're doing like 20 art forms in one, and they're also mocking society at the same time. Whereas, like, comedy, the language, like how much thought goes into language is like truly incredible. And, like, to hear a good comedian talk about how hard it is to own, like, what you see as a simple subject verb sentence took them months. I think that's beautiful. And because, like, what we're used to consuming is that special. And when they talk about it on these podcasts, you realize this is months of grinding it out in a hotel to make that magic. And, like, I think it's a good reminder too of, you don't get that magic overnight. You got to put in your time. You got to test out your language. Trust me, this book almost fell apart. I almost thought I lost my book deal. I didn't think I could do it. I had an existential crisis, freaked out a few times, but I realized it was that slow chog of just working through it that got me this. Because I wrote this whole book was going to be a different book. I wasn't going to do a robber baron framework, but then you just kind of realize it was just churning through that you get to that final thing. Because when it clicks, it clicks. You just know it. Like, when you know a joke is good, you know me, I get excited to say I have certain stock lines at this point. My husband jokes I have a soundboard at this point. So Stavi is one of my favorites. He has a special called Fat Rascal. I like Sam Morrill, Nicole Breyer. I love comedy. I mean, I like seeing things live right now, I think, in general.
Definitely. I think that it's like, that's one of the most reassuring things, is to go out to see a show, to see band play, to be in a crowd of people, and to just remember that, yeah, we have a long road to go and there's a lot to be fixed, but everybody's pretty normal and pretty excited to make it okay.
It is. And, like, even, like, I love going to movie theaters. Like, I just saw that movie. It's like that Kiki Palmer new comedy.
I didn't see it.
It's just I forget what it's called. I'll have to Google it later. But it's just an old fashioned buddy. It's kind of dumb, but it's so funny. It's just like to be in a room, like 30 other people laughing at dumb jokes. It's just like, it's good for the soul. Whereas, like, instead of just being in my room, in my apartment watching Netflix, it's the collectiveness is, like, lost. And, like, how do I kind of view this as almost like that 20. It's not cheap. It's $15, whatever, for a ticket. But, like, I don't want to say it's therapy, but it's like, I'm donating to artists, but I'm also like, it's a little bit of, like, self-care of just, like, yeah, I gotta laugh.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you say that it feels good to be in that room and to participate in the collective, because I would love to be able to record this podcast with an audience.
That's the goal eventually, yeah.
Right, because it's like to be able to have a bunch of people come together and then be able to have the conversation, have them be able to ask questions afterwards, have there be not just us sitting in our dead silent living room staring at a Zoom screen. I think that that's where really powerful things start to happen.
It is, and like I even that Wisconsin example I keep going back to is it was the weirdest acoustics. There was like 1,000 people in a room, but I could only hear the front row tables, and that was the donors. And so like even from like me talking, I was responding to the body language of a certain type of farmer. Like for example, I have a joke on ethanol where the only person that thinks ethanol is good, if you think ethanol is good for the climate in 2024, you think the world is flat. I love saying that line. I use it all the time. I used that line, and the whole front row was conventional farmers, and they gasped. And I was just like, I thought I lost my audience. And then I freaked out, and then I found out afterwards all the more regenerative convention, like the younger whatever farmers were in the back, and they were just loving it, hooting and hollering. But like, you know what I mean? I'm responding to the audience, and like that's the beauty of being in a room.
Mm-hmm.
It's a live entity that you can't control, and like as a performer, you're responding to it.
Remind me why you call it the rubber chicken circuit. You've said it multiple times, and I remember you telling an anecdote.
But here's the thing: a lot of the food tastes like rubber chicken. I think it comes from there's an old political writer called Theodore White. He used to write about, like, I think it's one of his terms. He was writing about Kennedy's 1960 campaign, and he talked about, like, it used to be in politics, you literally would just speak at every Rotary Club. I think someone called it the rubber chicken circuit. And like a lot of politics used to be that. Most politics now is just fundraising. But I love that phrase of like, you just kind of got to grind it out. You got to like do those. Because it used to be, people used to be in a lot more civic societies and used to have to like speak at every single one.
Mm.
So I call it the rubber chicken because I think the joke, I think there was a line in that book. This is totally my memory, and I could be 100% wrong here, of just like someone called it the rubber chicken circuit.
I love that. We got to get on the rubber chicken circuit delay.
Working on it. We got some things up our sleeves.
Indeed.
But yeah, man, I think we kept you for the full 3 hours, and I really appreciate you giving us all this time. It's been, you're an interesting dude. It's been really fun to learn what you've learned over this.
And everybody
journey.
should go out and buy Barron's.
Yeah, we'll put a link
great
to
reads.
it.
Really, for how technical it is, it's very well done.
No, I appreciate that. This has just been a fun conversation. It's like kind of like, I don't want to say nerd, but like it's
It is nerdy. This is nerd central.
Welcome to Nerdlandia. We could call it Nerdlandia easily.
Nerdlandia. No, it's what I appreciate is you clearly grasp with the material, but I like you force me in real time to like question things and like how it combined with other ideas. Instead of like walking through the plot of the book. I appreciate that. And like also it's you guys have very different mindsets, and it's fun to like have this conversation. You guys, I don't have the hardest subject for me in college was philosophy. I have a really hard time being theoretical. And so like, it's always, I know, sorry.
So if somebody asked you like, how would you feel if you hadn't had breakfast yesterday? You'd be like, but I did have breakfast yesterday. This is like a running joke on the internet. There's like a running joke on the internet that there's like a certain type of like very deeply anti-philosophical person where if you were like, well, how would you feel if you hadn't eaten breakfast yesterday? And they're like, but I did eat breakfast yesterday. And you're like, yes, but like, how would you feel?
In theory.
In theory.
No, but that is totally the way I look at that. Like, even when I think about like what's happened in this conversation, I'm trying to wrap it into a theory that I can try on in front of other people. Yeah. Like, I love taking someone's 3-hour presentation and distilling. Like, it'll take me sleeping overnight to actually consolidate it into something like that. But it is really interesting to organize things in such a way that it's a model of how reality works that you can test against other people's model of how things work. And all these models are still just models at the end of the day, and everybody's always missing some little piece of it. And across, this is our 320th episode of this or something. You start to, in my brain, I'm starting to like just glue little pieces together where I feel like I have a better grip on how the world works as a result of all these warring theories of how the world works. And that's kind of the goal of everything we're doing here, really.
It is. It's a beautiful thing that you realize it's such a live, living thing, and like you can barely get your head around it. You know what I mean? But it's fun. It's fun to like touch it, and like you're always discover. There's always a part you'll never know that you're always discovering.
I love that. But if you, in the future, want to bounce ideas around, you can reach out. We will be here bouncing ideas around, and so we'd love to have you.
I'll keep you posted on Cisco. I'm like chomping at the bit to talk about Cisco because it's just like this is why I love. My husband got me has taught me the art of Reddit. He's a big Redditor, and like, dear God, you type in Cisco to Reddit, and chefs just have a field day. Like, my favorite icebreaker to ask people right now is like, what's your favorite chain restaurant? Because people have so many hot takes about this over like restaurants. I thought grocery stores used to be that issue, but really restaurants. And so it's like it's been a really, and it's so funny because like these are things we all do, but there's very little scholarship here. Like there's very little scholarship on grocery. There's next to nothing on the restaurant industry, and like so many people live and make their do that for a living, and we all consume it to some degree.
Yeah, that's really true. I'd never thought about that. Do you have a favorite chain restaurant?
Texas Roadhouse.
Hell yeah.
I did not even think. Mine's In-N-Out for sure.
In-N-Out. What's Shiloh? What's yours?
Probably Chipotle, to be honest with you.
It's a solid choice.
I mean, I'd never ever eat Chipotle, but I would if I could. If I had the opportunity.
If there was one in town. We live rural enough that there's not a Chipotle in town, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, there's usually some better option. Yeah.
No, I mean, but that's what's fascinating is like my favorite. This is my current pet obsession that my husband truly hates, but he's accepted it with our marriage. Is there's a list by a trade publication in the restaurant industry that puts out the 300 largest chains in America, and so I made a list of the chains I hadn't been to. So when we travel, I have to check the chain off the list. So like when we were in Oregon, I had to go try Dutch Bros.
What do you think?
What is this like? Dutch Bros are taking off like crazy. And like the other one I think is most fascinating right now is Korean barbecue. There's a Korean barbecue chain called K-Pot. That's, to me, I think it's gonna be the next Olive Garden. You go in there, younger. It's so every box of America loves it, especially younger. It's kind of like the new fondue.
I love this so much. You sound like you'd be really, really fun to travel with across the board.
Well, trust me, when my husband's sitting there eating Perkins, he is not a happy camper. Because trust me, we eat a lot of bad chains. Like for every chain that's growing, there's chains dying, and they ain't pretty.
Yeah, but it's really like a foot on the ground phenomenon when you're just walking through the doors, and you can tell. Like, it was really funny because I got this like really little thrill of the being able to predict the fall of a chain when I walked into the Rite Aid in town. So again, we have a town of 20,000 people. There are 2 Rite Aids and a Walgreens, and one of the Rite Aids is in the same plaza as the Walgreens. And at some point I walked into one of the Rite Aids, and it was just like every single shelf was just bottled water and paper towels. And I was like, they're going out of business. And then like a week later, they announced bankruptcy for a bunch of their stores and like restructuring and things like that. And I was like, victory! Prediction lodged.
We know right away when private equity owns a chain because they're just leeching it. You can just feel like my hot take is in the next 10, 20 years, sit-down chain restaurants are going to die. It's just the economics of a standalone restaurant are so high. Restaurants are moving to strip malls. So it's all this Chipotle kind of thing. Like, I wish we bought stock in Cava a few years ago when that thing took off.
In what?
Because the price points, like a bowl is like $10 to $20, whereas a sit-down chain restaurant, that can be $20, $50 per person.
Yeah.
And it's just not justifiable anymore for most people.
Would you say you wish you bought stock in what? I didn't hear the word.
Oh, Cava.
Cava. Oh, it's like that's like the newest. We live chain thing.
Yeah, it's like it's Mediterranean bowl. And the last one for your listeners out there, so Panera is kind of running downhill. My coffee barons, turns out, like they're just kind of sucking the life out of it because they're private equity. Is the founder of Panera is not even happy with what happened to Panera, so he got involved in a new basically Panera competitor called Tate. If you're ever in DC or Boston, it's like a bougie Panera, where Panera is going Walmart and Tate is going to be like the new Target.
This is fascinating, right? Like, I think that these are all signifiers of the motions that happen behind the scenes, and then you like see the shark fin kind of come up above the water, and you can reconstruct what's happening beneath the surface when you see it. And
Yep.
there's no other way to do it except to walk in and try the food and like look at the staff and see how all of it fits together. Because I think you're right that you can tell when something's just getting siphoned.
That, and then like look at the clientele, like who's going there. The reason why I think K-pot's the future is the average age in those units, it's like 29. And you also see a lot of like alcohol, like people are ordering a drink, and that's where the money is in restaurants. And so you're just like, oh, this concept is hitting.
Interesting. Okay, well,
So
we
this is
will.
what we do.
I'm going to start doing it as well, and I will send you periodic reports on things that we discover in our travels. I think it would be
I'm
really fun.
looking forward to these hot takes.
Fantastic. Austin, you're such a joy to talk to and a joy to read, and
Oh,
that's a
this has been
rare
fun.
combination. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on, guys.
Yeah, let's stay in touch, man. I definitely want to hear about the details as they fill in, and check out your next book whenever that gets around. We'll be here doing this, so let's link up again.
It could be 3 years, give me 10 years. I don't know. One day at a time.
We'll be here.
Indeed. All right, have a good
All
rest of
right,
your day.
bye, Austin. Bye, everybody.
Bye, buddy.